Chapter 1823. When Mother Earth hunted for food, she usually only needed to use one black snake. Yet this time, she had sent out all of them, which showed how much importance she placed on Ningshuamo. Of course, she was determined to win. The flesh and blood of the Devil Master, she had always been waiting to taste it. Ningshuamo naturally didn't know the inside story. At this moment, she still didn't know that Mother Earth was the one behind all this. She also didn't know that these black snakes were actually the tentacles that Mother Earth had stretched into the ground. Heaven's splitter sword appeared, and flames rose up, lighting up the entire space. The black snake danced wildly, and countless black bones burst out from its body. They were like sharp arrows that shot towards Ningshuamo. Ningshuamo narrowed her eyes and didn't dodge. Sword light swirled around her to form a huge ball of flames, and when those black bones shot into the huge ball of flames, they gave off sizzling sounds and vanished without a trace in the blink of an eye. The speed of the huge ball of flames didn't decrease, and it directly crashed into the body of the black snake in the lead. A world-shaking explosion rang out, and a huge hole was blown open in the body of the black snake that couldn't be harmed by anything. Chirp! That black snake gave off an ear-piercing cry, and countless black bones poured out from that huge hole. Those black bones were different from normal black bones. They were all dyed in blood, and the air was filled with the fishy smell of blood. That injured black snake seemed to have been struck by lightning, and it plunged back into the ground with a plop, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The other black snakes seemed to have discussed it beforehand, and they suddenly spread out in all directions, surrounding Ningshuamo from 8 directions. Without waiting for her to make a move, every black snake shot out countless black bone arrows, and they attacked Ningshuamo from all directions without any blind spots. This kind of black bone was extremely poisonous, and as long as one of them pierced Ningshuamo, her nerves would instantly be paralyzed, and she would lose all ability to move. She would then be at their mercy. If one looked down from the sky from afar, you would see over a dozen tall monsters surrounding a petite girl like an iron wall. The black bone arrows that were shot out were densely packed, and they poured towards Ningshuamo like a tsunami. They could drown her 800 times. Shwa! A dazzling red light that resembled the morning sun lit up once again. It was like a sun rising from the vast darkness. In the middle of the sun was the little girl. The sun moved extremely quickly, and like a flash of lightning, it rushed towards one of the black snakes. When the black bone arrows hit the sun, they sounded like raindrops falling to the ground, but they couldn't stop the sun from moving. The sun crashed into another black snake. Another ear-piercing screech rang out. Just like the first black snake, a large bloody wound appeared on its body, and it drilled into the ground and disappeared. That sun didn't stop, and it crashed into another snake that was next to it. Just like that, one after another, the black snakes were injured and burrowed back into the ground. The last 3 black snakes probably knew that they wouldn't be able to take advantage of the situation. Without waiting for the sun to crash into them, they also drilled into the ground. You want to run? How could it be that easy? Ningshuamo leaped into the air. Her movements were as fast as lightning as she followed the last snake. Mother Earth was about to cry from the pain. Her tentacles that had always been successful were all defeated. She would tremble for a while if one of her tentacles was injured, but now, she had injured 17 to 18 of them. She simply didn't know which one to stop the pain first. The martial arts of that little devil master were simply too out of her expectations. 50,000 years ago, when this little devil master came to her, he was still extremely innocent, and his martial arts weren't so terrifyingly high. Chapter 1824. How did her abilities become so high after not seeing her for 50,000 years? More importantly, a pure devil could actually execute the moves of a god. This was why Mother Earth had kicked an iron plate. She wasn't stupid either. After her tentacles got injured one after another, she knew she couldn't use them to harm Ningxiumo anymore, so she pulled them all back. Forget it, she wasn't going to eat the Devil Master's flesh anymore. She would let that little girl off this time. That little girl probably didn't know these black snakes were her tentacles, so she could go and mess around in the sea of black bones. Anyway, when the tentacles were pulled back, the earth and rocks would automatically bury the places where the tentacles passed by, so there wouldn't be any traces left underground. That little Devil Master wouldn't be able to find this place either. Murderous aura. Murderous aura that was like a tidal wave suddenly poured out from underground. With a flash of red light, a person flew up from underground and floated in midair of the hole. Mother Earth's expression changed, and countless tree roots swirled around her body, protecting her tightly. Ningxiumo looked down at Mother Earth from above and looked at everything in the surroundings. She instantly understood everything. You are the one who caused my friend's death. She gently spat out a few words. Her voice was indifferent as though she was telling a plain fact. She was clearly wearing fiery red clothes that floated in the air like a burning fire. However, the aura around her body was extremely cold. That was an extremely cold pressure that caused the temperature in the hall to plummet. It was as though the warm mountains and warm waters of Jiangnan had fallen to the North Pole with howling cold winds. Her aura made Mother Earth, who was used to seeing great winds and waves, suddenly feel a chill in her heart. Those who come to see me for the second time have to stay behind to be my sacrificial offering. This is my rule. He replaced you as the sacrificial offering, that's why I let you go. Mother Earth opened her mouth, and her voice was also cold. She had lived for God knows how many years longer than Ningxiumo, so the aura around her body was naturally extremely strong. She was neither a demon nor a god. Because she lived deep underground and did not participate in the disputes of the six realms, very few people knew about her. However, she was the creator of this continent after all. Naturally, her aura of a ruler was also very strong. It was not inferior to Ningxiumo's. Both of their auras erupted at the same time. Even before they clashed, the great hall of the Lifire Palace already couldn't endure the pressure. Cracking sounds rang out, and if it wasn't for the intertwined tree roots, the walls would have already collapsed. Seeing that someone has already become a sacrifice, I'll let you off this time. Hurry up and leave. Don't make me regret it. Mother Earth threatened. After all, she had lived for so many years, and her intuition was still very sharp. She knew that Ningxiumo was a strong opponent when she confronted her. If they really fought, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. The most important thing was that the longer a person lived, the more afraid they would be of death. Therefore, Mother Earth was also afraid of death. She didn't really want to fight with her life on the line. She still wanted to live well and continue to be the supreme ruler of this world. Therefore, when she saw Ningxiumo, her first thought was to scare her away. Meanwhile, Ningxiumo only smiled at her threat. You want to let me off? But I don't want to let you off. You have to pay with your life for killing someone. Mother Earth, you have to pay with your life for my friend this time. The smile of this red-clothed little devil master was very sweet, and there was a dimple on one side of her face. However, there was no smile in her eyes at all. Her pupils had already gradually turned into a demonic purple. It was an intense and cold purple. Her pupils were vertical and deep, and when one took a look, their heart would also feel like it was frozen. The words she spoke were like ice blades that gave off an incomparably cold aura. Chapter 1825. Mother Earth's heart turned cold again. You are courting death. And, indeed. Ningxiumo smiled again. I want to send you, death. Before she could finish her sentence, Heaven Splitter's sword appeared in her palm again. She lowered her head and blew gently on the tip of the sword. Her posture was devilish and beautiful, yet it made people tremble with fear. Now that she had said this, Mother Earth also knew that there was going to be a bloody battle. Very good, since you are courting death, don't blame me. Mother Earth narrowed her eyes and suddenly waved her palm outwards. Countless black lights burst forth from her body and flipped in the air, transforming into black souls. These souls were densely packed together and formed a black sea that was like a wave. They swept towards Ning Xuemo. Soul weapons. Furthermore, they were soul weapons with immense resentment and extremely strong abilities. Ning Xuemo's eyes narrowed slightly and she suddenly sneered. This Mother Earth looked like an expert that stood aloof from worldly affairs, but she was actually such a cruel and cunning person. She had been living underground like a groundhog for tens of thousands of years. She had killed countless people, and those who had died here were all turned into soul weapons by her secret techniques. These people were all overlords when they were alive, and now that they had died here silently, their souls couldn't be released, so their resentment was naturally immense. Now that they were released by Mother Earth using her secret technique, they couldn't wait to tear apart everything that was alive. There was a barrier around Mother Earth that controlled them, so they naturally couldn't harm her. Therefore, they went straight for Ning Xuemo. She was the only living creature here other than Mother Earth. Therefore, they wanted to tear her apart. The screams of the ghosts were as sharp as knives, and all Ning Xuemo could see were all kinds of human heads that were rushing towards her. Their faces still had the appearance of when they were alive. There were ugly and handsome, male and female, and they were densely packed like a huge tide as they flooded towards her from all directions. Ning Xuemo's expression changed slightly. She wasn't afraid of these soul weapons, but she was afraid that there was someone she was familiar with among them. Would Shuailan also be among them? Because of this concern, she couldn't unleash the kind of large-scale attack that could truly kill a spirit soul. She could only attack from a small area. After making sure that there was no one around, she finally made her move. Mother Earth was still too careless. She thought that because she had the soul weapon tied, she would be able to kill gods and Buddhas without fail. Perhaps this weapon of mass destruction could really deal with gods, but this time, she was dealing with devils. Demons were naturally immune to evil tricks, not to mention that the other party was the spiritual leader of the demons, the Devil Lord. If it wasn't for the fact that Ning Xuemo was wary of these soul weapons, they wouldn't be able to threaten her at all. The crimson sword light was like a meteor shower, slashing on the bodies of the soul weapons. The murderous heaven sword was formed by the accumulation of the heaven and earth's murderous chi. The murderous chi of these soul weapons paled in comparison to the murderous chi of the murderous heaven sword. Cries of agony could be heard in the palace. The karmic fire of the red lotus that emerged from the sky splitter sword was the bane of these soul weapons. Balls of soul weapons dissipated in the karmic fire of the red lotus and turned into nothing. Mother Earth had a total of 3,000 soul weapons, and when they were gathered together, even a spit from one of them could drown a person to death. Furthermore, these soul weapons all had extremely strong abilities. Furthermore, Ning Xuemo was afraid that Shuailan's soul would pounce over by mistake, so she didn't dare to set up a fire barrier that could block these soul weapons. Her defense was completely dependent on the dancing of the sky splitter sword. Chapter 1826. In this way, it was hard to avoid oversights. Furthermore, during this period of time, Mother Earth's black snake-like roots would attack her from time to time. Therefore, Ning Xuemo still suffered some injuries. She got a sword in her chest, a knife in her back, and even a spear in her abdomen. The blades of these soul weapons all contained poison of the soul, and if it was an ordinary immortal or devil, they would probably be sent to meet the gods. Blood soaked her clothes, but Ning Xuemo didn't even bat an eyelash. She moved to and fro among the soul weapons, and wherever the sword light passed, there would be cries of pain. None. None. The soul of Shuilan wasn't among the soul weapons that she destroyed. As the number of soul weapons decreased, her moves also became faster and faster. 2 hours passed, and when there were only 1 to 200 soul weapons left, Ning Xuemo could already take a look at them all. There was no Shuilan. She seemed to be disappointed and relieved at the same time. Heaven Splitter sword flew into the sky again, and it split into several hundred swords in an instant. They flew towards the remaining soul weapons like flowing lights. Cries of ghosts and howls of wolves reverberated through the entire space, and black blood splattered down. Mother Earth's perfect killing weapon was destroyed by Ning Xuemo just like that. Destroyed. Mother Earth's heart ached so much that she almost pulled it out. However, she couldn't care about her heartache now. She was Mother Earth, she was born here and grew up here. Even though her magic power was high, she couldn't move. In other words, she couldn't run even if she wanted to. She saw the Heaven Splitter sword in Ning Xuemo's palm flying up to attack the remaining soul weapons, and she steeled her heart. Countless black snake roots whipped towards Ning Xuemo. It was obvious that she was bullying her because her weapon was temporarily out of her hand, and she couldn't protect herself. This was her only chance to kill Ning Xuemo, so she didn't want to miss it. The black snakes danced wildly and pounced towards Ning Xuemo, wanting to turn her into a porcupine. Mother Earth thought Ning Xuemo would set up a barrier to block it, and her roots could break any barrier, so Ning Xuemo couldn't avoid being killed. However, he did not expect that Ning Xuemo had no intention of setting up a wizardry barrier at all. She did not even resist. Her figure flashed like lightning and she pounced on a black snake. She grabbed the black bone spikes on the black snake's body and pulled with all her might. Mother Earth let out a world-shaking scream. Ning Xuemo actually tore the black snake tree root into two. Mother Earth's body twitched from the pain, and before she could do anything, a red light flashed in front of her eyes. That little girl in red had already pounced in front of her, and Heaven Splitter sword light spat out a red light that was a foot long as it swept towards Mother Earth's neck. Mother Earth was scared out of her wits. In a moment of desperation, he blocked Ning Xuemo's sword with his hand. "You can't kill me. If I die, the God-fiend continent will be destroyed." The crimson sword pierced through her hand and stopped a few centimeters away from her neck. The scorching sword breath churned around Mother Earth's neck, giving her goosebumps. It also destroyed her usual dignified image. She couldn't care about anything else. She didn't even care that one of her hands had been sliced into two. She hurriedly said, "I'm Mother Earth, I'm in charge of the essence of the entire God-fiend continent. If I die, the mountains will crumble, and everyone on this continent will die with me. Is that so?" Ning Xuemo's lips curled up slightly, and that was a bloodthirsty smile. "But what does that have to do with me?" Mother Earth choked, and only then did she remember that the other party was a devil. How could a devil care about the life and death of everyone? Ning Xuemo's treasure sword moved forward another half an inch, and her smile became colder. "I'll count to 3, I hope you can give me a reason not to kill you, otherwise." Chapter 1827. Ning Xuemo's sword moved forward another half an inch, and her smile became colder. "I'll count to 3, and I hope you can give me a reason not to kill you. Otherwise." She had to force this she-male to hand over Shuilan's soul. However, if she asked for it directly, Mother Earth would use it as a threat, and who knew how much trouble she would cause. Therefore, she had to force her to hand it over herself. Shuilan's corporeal body was gone, but if she could get his soul back, she could send him to reincarnate again. She could even use his soul to condense his body and think of a way to revive him. She wasn't willing to let him die like this. Mother Earth's face was deathly pale. The black snake tentacles on her body were all injured, and they were all twitching. She wanted to turn one around and attack Ning Xuemo from behind, but she couldn't do it. Originally, it was others who were the meat on her chopping board, but now it was her turn to be the meat on someone else's chopping board. The more afraid of death a person was, the easier it was for them to lose and die when they were truly fighting with their lives on the line. Her martial arts were actually about the same as Ning Xuemo's, or even slightly higher, but she was afraid of death. On the other hand, Ning Xuemo was famous for not being afraid of death. Furthermore, her battle experience was miles ahead of Mother Earth's. Once she fought with her life on the line, even those several levels higher than her would have to admit defeat. Those who were afraid of death would only lose when they met those who fought with their lives on the line. At this moment, under Ning Xuemo's coercion, Mother Earth's body trembled like a sieve. I'm not lying to you, once I die, this world will really collapse. You might not be afraid because you are the Devil Master, but don't you have friends and family? They will also die. Before she could finish, the tip of Ning Xuemo's sword had already touched the fine flesh on her neck. You really haven't learned your lesson. I already said that even if this world collapses, I won't care. The tip of the sword entered her flesh, and a thread of blood flowed out. It was clearly just a scratch, but Mother Earth was so frightened that her face turned deathly pale. You don't. What did you say you wanted? Or what do you want to know? If I have it, I will definitely tell you everything I know. Where is my friend's soul? Hand him over first. Ning Xuemo coldly stated her first condition. Mother Earth was stunned, and her eyes flickered. You care about him so much. In that case, she could use this as an excuse to fight for a chance of survival. How smart was Ning Xuemo? One look at Mother Earth's expression and Earth knew what she was going to do. She smiled and said softly, "What do you think? I can kill my own people, but if someone else kills them, it will make me very unhappy. Of course, it doesn't matter if you don't hand it over. It's the same if I make you pay with your life. He is a demon king and you are Mother Earth, using your life to repay his is enough." She blinked her eyes again and smiled even more gently. Forget it, you don't have to hand it over. I'll just kill you. She exerted force with the sword in her hand. Wait! Mother Earth shouted, and she didn't dare to keep him in suspense anymore. Devil Master, it's not that I don't want to hand him over, it's just that his soul really isn't with me. Before he died, he used soul explosion technique, so I'm afraid his soul has already dispersed. Ning Xuemo's expression changed. Soul dispersed. His soul had been destroyed again. I don't believe it. Ning Xuemo said word by word. You are really not obedient. You still dare to play tricks in such a situation. Her treasure sword suddenly flashed, and half of Mother Earth's ear was gone. Mother Earth was almost paralyzed from fear, and she said anxiously, "No. Definitely not." Chapter 1828. Mother Earth was almost paralyzed from fear, and she said anxiously, "No. Definitely not. I can swear that what he used then was the soul explosion technique, otherwise, my leg wouldn't have been injured." Looking at Mother Earth's expression and words, she didn't seem to be lying. Ning Xuemo's fingers that were holding the sword turned cold, and ruthlessness flashed past her purple eyes. In that case, you will have to pay the price. Your soul will scatter, right? I know this technique as well. No. How about this? I can't hand over your friend, how about I answer some questions that you are interested in? Mother Earth was anxious to live, so she tried her best to negotiate. I don't seem to be interested in anything else. Ning Xuemo's voice was indifferent. Don't you want to know the exact origin of the purple fiend? Don't you want to know what is the disorder of heaven and earth, the chaos of the heavenly Tao? Ning Xuemo looked at her with an indifferent gaze. I feel that this has nothing to do with me. Furthermore, how do I know if you are lying? I might be wrong in the way I do things, but I never lie. I can't lie when it concerns the heavenly Tao. Mother Earth was just short of swearing. Ning Xuemo's gaze drooped slightly. These were indeed what she was concerned about, because these might be the key to why Shinjioli had to leave. Tell me about it first. Her tone was indifferent, but her heart was slightly raised. You. Let go of me first. Mother Earth saw that she had the intention to move, so she immediately made a request. I asked you to tell me, I just wanted to hear it for the time being. If I'm satisfied with what you say, I might spare your life. However, it's still too early to let you go now. Ning Xuemo naturally wouldn't let her go. If she let her go, it wouldn't be easy to catch her again, and she would have to spend more effort. Ning Xuemo's injuries weren't light, and the wounds on her body were very painful. However, she had always been resilient, so no matter how painful it was, she could endure it. She even didn't show it on the surface, as though she couldn't feel any pain. In order to survive, Mother Earth had no choice but to reveal the origin of the purple fiend under the pressure of Ning Xuemo's treasure sword. To Ning Xuemo, her words were no less shocking than a clap of thunder. His heart sank to the bottom of the earth. A long time ago, the Divine Demon Continent wasn't called the Divine Demon Continent. Instead, it was called the Six Realms Continent. The living beings of the six realms only believed in one God. This God was created by heaven and earth and was in charge of the general balance of the six realms. He would not be biased towards any one realm and was worshipped as the master of heaven and earth. In other words, he was the master of all six realms. However, at some point in time, there was a deviation in heaven and earth, and another devil was born. As the demon grew stronger, he became known as the Demon Master. Slowly, he became as powerful as a supreme god and became the master of the three realms. The Six Realms Continent changed its name to the Divine Demon Continent. There can't be two suns in the sky, and there can't be two lords in the people. In fact, the Six Realms Continent only needed one lord. Once there were two lords, the order of the world would be reversed, and the purple evil would begin to breed. Of course, if the gods and devils simply coexisted, even if the purple evil started to breed, it wouldn't cause any harm. However, the gods and devils were born to be opposites. Once the gods and devils fell in love, it would be the true calamity of the six realms. The purple evil would grow rapidly, and one of the gods and devils would have to disappear. Otherwise, the purple evil would explode in a short period of time and destroy the six realms. The only way to seal the purple evil was to sacrifice one of the gods and devils. Only then could the balance of the Six Realms Continent be maintained. Chapter 1829. After Mother Earth finished her explanation, her eyes stared at Ning Xuemo's face. 50,000 years ago, Devil Master came to find me once to ask for advice on how to chase after a man. If I'm not wrong, little Devil Master wanted to chase after Venerable God then. Ning Xuemo didn't say anything. She didn't have the memories from 50,000 years ago, so she naturally didn't know if Mother Earth was right or wrong. However, she seemed to be very pure and straightforward 50,000 years ago. To find a way to chase after a man, she would go through so much trouble to find Mother Earth. These were all secondary. What gave Ning Xuemo the heaviest blow was that only one of her and Shinjioli could live. Her mind was blown, and she pursed her lips tightly. She said coldly, "I don't believe it. Why can't gods and devils love each other? What kind of broken rule is this? Why haven't I heard of it before? 50,000 years ago, the 6 realms were completely destroyed, and only a few of them survived. Even if they did, they probably lived in seclusion. Naturally, no one knows about this rule anymore. Mother Earth's gaze moved around Ning Xuemo's face. If I'm not wrong, you haven't recovered your memories from 50,000 years ago, so you naturally don't know about this rule. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. Who set this rule? Could it be Venerable God? Mother Earth shook her head. No, it's Heavenly Tao. Heavenly Tao. What the hell is that? Ning Xuemo sneered. Wasn't Venerable God the earliest master of the 6 realms? Shouldn't he be the one to set these rules? Mother Earth said, no matter how powerful gods and devils are, they are born from heaven and earth. Naturally, they have to follow the rules of Heavenly Tao. Ning Xuemo shook her head. I don't believe it. Then where can I see Heavenly Tao? Mother Earth lowered her eyes. Heavenly Tao isn't in the 6 realms. When something goes against Heavenly Tao will give a warning and appear automatically. I believe that Venerable God has seen it before. I've seen it before too. This was too illusory. Ning Xuemo lifted her chin with her sword and looked down at her. Are you trying to lie to me? Mother Earth's eyes didn't flicker with a hint of guilt. I'm not lying. You don't have to think about what happened 50,000 years ago. Think about what happened recently. That Supreme God once came to me to ask for advice on how to cure the Devil Lord's chronic illness and how to restore his memory. He must have fallen in love with you back then. However, at that time, he had not yet entered the Fanteon Palace to recover his memories as a divine venerable, nor had he regained his divine position. How did he treat you after he regained his godhood? When did the purple evil break out this time? How was it sealed? If I'm not wrong, that supreme divinity is no longer in this world, right? Only then did the 6 realms return to normal. Ning Xuemo's face turned pale, and he couldn't answer Mother Earth's question. After pausing for a while, she sneered as if she had suddenly grasped at a life-saving straw. I think Your Excellency might have forgotten. Since you said that only one of us could live, then why did you tell me that he would be reborn in 100 years? Mother Earth sighed. That's because I thought Your Excellency would die here and become my blood food. Once you, the Devil Master, die, heaven and earth would need a normal master. Venerable God would naturally be reborn. However, since you are still alive, Venerable God won't reappear in this world. Ning Xuemo, legend has it that there's a kind of flower on the Yellow Springs Road called the Permitha flower. There's a saying in the Buddhist scriptures, the Permitha flower blooms for 1,000 years, withers for 1,000 years, and the flowers and leaves will never meet again. Love isn't karma, fate determines life and death. Chapter 1830. Spider lilies, flowers and leaves will never meet again, their fates would be like this spider lily's. If he lived, she would die. If he died, she would live. They loved each other, but they would never meet again. Ning Xuemo didn't know how she walked out of Mythical Fire Palace. Her heart was heavy, but her legs were light. She couldn't step on solid ground. She didn't execute Mother Earth. After all, this person's life and death would affect the survival of the entire God-Devil continent. Shinjioli had once protected this continent, and he might be reborn on this continent in the future. She didn't want him to see a barren and dead continent like Mars when he returned. She didn't care about the life and death of other people, but her son was still living on this continent. She couldn't let anything happen to her son. Of course, Ning Xuemo also didn't want to let go of the culprit who had killed Shui Lan so easily, so she just crippled all of Mother Earth's skills and chopped off her 2 arms and 16 black snake-like tree roots. She barely managed to keep her alive to linger on at death's door. Ning Xuemo used Heaven Splitter Sword to do this. There was poison in Heaven's splitter sword, and it was an incurable poison. Back then, even with Shinjuli's great abilities, he still couldn't heal himself. Therefore, Ning Xuemo believed this Mother Earth wouldn't be able to do evil anymore. She should live her life desperately trying to detoxify herself. She could be considered to have taken revenge for Shuailan. Ning Xuemo's mind was in a mess. She had once questioned Mother Earth about the coexistence of gods and devils, and Mother Earth had laughed evilly. If you can't coexist, you have to give up your identity as the Devil Master completely. Ning Xuemo wasn't interested in the identity of the Devil Master. If she didn't become the Devil Master, Shinjuli would be able to return. In that case, she would give up the identity of the Devil Master without a second word. Therefore, when her eyes lit up, she didn't expect Mother Earth's next sentence to send her back to hell. You are a devil born from heaven and earth. This Devil Master identity isn't something you can give up just because you want to. You still need to make a complete sacrifice. Ning Xuemo naturally asked what kind of sacrifice she needed to make, but Mother Earth didn't say anything no matter what. Ning Xuemo tortured her thoroughly, but she refused to say anything more. She was forced to say, "This is the real God's secret. If I say it out loud, my soul will suffer the calamity of heavenly punishment and will never be free." Therefore, she would rather die in Ning Xuemo's hands at this time than suffer the pain of eternity. Ning Xuemo swayed as she walked out of Lifire Palace for the second time. Mother Earth looked at her back view from behind, and her eyes were filled with resentment and delight. She still had one more important thing that she hadn't told this little Devil Master. That was, if she died or made a complete sacrifice, even if God was reborn, the reborn God might not be the same God as before. Therefore, it was impossible for her to see her lover again. She was destined to be alone for the rest of her life. Unless that God used some kind of heaven-defying magic to turn things around, the miserable ending of this little Devil Master was already destined. The hope of 100 years had become a bubble, and even the promise of 1,000 years had become uncertain. Her lover was dead, and so was her friend. The two people who originally occupied the largest part of her life had now disappeared. She was the only one left in this world. If it wasn't for little Nianmao in her heart, she almost wanted to be buried in this dark underground and never come out again. When she finally returned to the surface, the sky outside was already completely dark. The green mountains and clear water, the blue sky and white clouds, and the moon was waning. Chapter 1831. Green mountains, clear water, blue sky, white clouds, a waning moon. From now on, she would be the only one enjoying the scenery. No one would accompany her to watch the clouds roll by. The place she came out from was at the foot of the mountain, and coincidentally, it was the place where she and Shuailan had barbecued their game. Now, the traces of the barbecue were still there, but that man would never return. She stood on the spot for a while and looked up at the sky in a daze. No one knew what she was thinking about. She also didn't know how long she was in a daze when there seemed to be some movement behind her. She subconsciously turned back and saw a woman in white floating not far away. Her beautiful face was slightly pale, and a pair of ink-black eyes were looking at her. Fairy Ice Jade. Why was she here? Fairy Ice Jade walked over, but she didn't look at Ning Xuemo. Instead, she looked at the ground under her feet and asked softly, "Is he dead?" Ning Xuemo froze, because of this girl's sharp senses. Why do you ask? Could this Fairy Ice Jade know some inside information? Fairy Ice Jade still didn't look at her as she stared at the ground beneath her feet. After a while, she opened her mouth and said, "I drank with him for 3 days. He got drunk, and every time he got drunk, he would talk about you, Ning Xuemo." Fairy Ice Jade continued, "Sometimes, I would change the topic for him, but he would try his best to bring it back. It was as if he was possessed, crying and laughing one moment. He said he was a fool, he said he was poisoned by your goo and couldn't let go no matter what. He said he wanted to let go, but he couldn't do it. He said he would probably only be free if he died. Ning Xuema's fingers turned cold, and she said hoarsely, "You don't have to say any more." How could she not know about Shui Lan's deep feelings for her? However, she couldn't respond. Fairy Ice Jade seemed to have opened up a chatterbox. "He has been paying attention to your movements these few days, and he knew you were going to find Mother Earth. He was afraid you would get into an accident, so he followed you secretly." Ning Xuema's heart ached like she was drowning, and she closed her eyes slightly. When she opened them again, they were already clear. "He knows this is the second time I'm finding Mother Earth. He didn't mention it, but judging from his demeanor, he seems to have this suspicion. He didn't tell me earlier." Along the way, Shui Lan didn't mention anything about meeting Mother Earth for the second time. "If he had told you and let you know the dangers involved, would you still have gone?" Ice Jade Fairy asked. Ning Xuema paused for a moment before she finally answered, "I will." Her trip to the underground world was imperative, so it didn't matter whether she knew about this rule or not. The difference was that if she had known about this rule, she wouldn't have let Shui Lan follow her no matter what. She would have searched for a breakthrough underground and dealt with Mother Earth herself. Shui Lan probably understood this as well, so he chose not to say anything. He chose to stay by her side and become the sacrifice instead of her. He used his own method to protect her, just like how she had agreed to take him in as a guard in her first life, and he had personally promised to protect her for the rest of his life, until the end of his life. Shui Lan used a tragic stroke to draw an end to his own life, and he had also left an indelible mark in her heart. The cold stars flickered in the sky, the cool breeze was still the same, and the bright moon was still the same. However, the person who left would never return. The only person in this world who could save the person whose soul had been scattered was no longer in this world, and Shui Lan naturally wouldn't reincarnate, much less return. Chapter 1832. The Divine Lord, the only person in this world who could save the soul of a person, was no longer in this world. Naturally, Shui Lan would not be reincarnated, and he would not come back. There was a rush of blood in her chest, and there was a sweet taste in her throat. Ning Xuema staggered a little. The wounds on her body had been treated, so it was not obvious on the surface. Ice Jade Fairy could not tell either. Ice Jade Fairy stood there and slowly took out some fruits and snacks. She also took out a gourd of wine and opened the gourd. She smiled at the sky. "Elan, let me toast you. This is your favorite wine, your favorite fruits, and snacks." Her voice was slightly hoarse. It sounded like she was crying and laughing at the same time. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She finally noticed that Ice Jade Fairy looked very haggard. She looked even more haggard than when she had just sealed Zisha. "Have you been waiting for him here?" She could not help but ask. Ice Jade Fairy did not look back, but her voice was dim. "He has been waiting for you to come back, but I have been waiting for him to come back." She had been standing behind him, but he would never notice her. He only had eyes for his Momo. She knew that he would die this time, but she still waited here, hoping that a miracle would happen. However, the miracle did not happen. Shui Lan, the man who was as dazzling as fire, would never come back. He used his death to commemorate his love, and also to free himself. However, she could not be freed. She had chased after him for 2 lifetimes, but his eyes never stopped on her. The wine spilled on the ground, and the air was filled with the fragrance of the wine. Ice Jade Fairy looked at Ning Xuema. "Do you want to have a drink?" Ning Xuema shook her head lightly. "I should go." She turned around and strode away. She knew that she might be too heartless in the eyes of Ice Jade Fairy, but she could not care less. If possible, she also wanted to get drunk to relieve her worries. She also wanted to get drunk in the wine town, away from the burning reality. However, she could not. Little Nyenma was still waiting for her. She could not break her promise to the child. Ning Xuema finally rushed back to Fantian Palace before dawn. As soon as she entered the palace, before she could see the scenery inside, a small body threw itself into her arms like a cannonball. Mother! Ning Xuema was knocked back a step by him. She picked him up and looked at him in her arms. After not seeing him for 3 days, the little guy seemed to have lost a lot of weight. There were dark circles under his big eyes. It was obvious that he didn't sleep well these 3 days. The little guy hugged her neck tightly and cried, "Mother, you scared me to death. I thought you would never come back." Ning Xuema had promised him 3 days. If he counted carefully, she should have come back last night, not at dawn the next day. Shen Nyenma was probably traumatized. Although he had been waiting obediently in the Fantian Palace, he had been anxious. He was afraid that his mother would never return. Just like that, he waited and waited. On the 3rd day, seeing that the time promised by his mother had passed, his little heart sank again and again. He simply stood at the gate and stared anxiously. The sound of the wind blowing through the treetops was enough to make him jump up. He was very scared and wanted to cry, but he knew that crying was useless at a young age. The only thing he could do was to wait endlessly. Until Ning Xuema really came back and opened the gate of Fantian Palace, he was relieved and directly rushed to her. Until he fell into the familiar warm embrace, his little heart was really relieved. However, he still hugged her neck and did not let go. Chapter 1833. Ning Xuema naturally knew what her son was worried about. She felt as though her heart was being pricked by something. Her child was still young. She really did not have the ability to indulge her sadness. Any pain, any sadness, any blow, she had to swallow it all silently. Little Nyenma had already lost his father. She could not let him lose his mother too. She kissed the child's face. "Don't worry. Mother will come back." Just as she said that, she felt a tightness in her chest. There was a sweet taste in her throat, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Fortunately, she turned her head in time and did not spray the blood on the child. "Mother." Shen Nyenma was frightened. "It's okay." Ning Xuema tried to comfort him, but her vision suddenly turned black. Her legs went soft, and she lost consciousness. She was severely injured when she fought with Mother Earth, but she had been holding on. Originally, she should have immediately meditated to recover when she returned to the ground. However, she rushed back because she was afraid that Nyenma would be worried. Coupled with the continuous mental blows, she finally could not take it anymore and fainted in front of her son. Before she fainted, the only thing she was thankful for was that she did not faint on the way back. Otherwise, little Nyenma would have cried to death waiting for her. She heard little Nyenma's voice. In a daze, she struggled to reply, "Mother. It's okay. Sleep. I will be fine after a sleep." Before she could finish the sentence, she completely fainted. The person in reality was no longer there. If she could see him from time to time in her dream, could she treat this dream as reality? Could she treat reality as just a nightmare? Ning Xuema saw Shinjiuli again in her dream. Moreover, she could still clearly understand that this was a dream, and it was an old story from 50,000 years ago. It was even a continuation of the previous dream. Ning Xuema deeply felt that this was not bad. It was equivalent to her re-experiencing the life of Shinjiuli in her dream. It was equivalent to another lifetime. This time, the perspective was still from the perspective of the Devil Master, Xuema. Xuema's hands were poisonous. She had scratched herself badly because of the allergic reaction. Her face was like a cat's, and she couldn't go out for a long time. She had the urge to smash the mirror. Although she was often injured, she was born and raised by the heavens. Her self-healing ability was extraordinarily strong. If she was stabbed today, she would be completely healed tomorrow. Only this time, even though she had been recuperating for half a month, the bloodstains on her face were still obvious. This made her a little anxious. Her subordinates told her that there was a type of herb in the Sea of Clear Skies that had miraculous effects on skin scratches, so she went there. What she didn't expect was that she would meet Shinjuli there. Of course, these days, she was thinking about how to make him her husband. However, because of the ugly wound on her face, she didn't want to see him, but she still sent someone to deliver the flowers. Shuema was very tenacious in everything she did. Although her face couldn't be seen, she didn't lose much of her kung fu. She was still very capable. Every day, she would pick some specific flowers and send someone to deliver them to him. The person who was sent by her to deliver the flowers would come back hesitantly, saying that the flowers had been delivered. But often, when they saw the flowers again, they were the same as when they were sent. Other than being a little flat, the position of the bouquet didn't change at all. Of course, occasionally, the bouquet would disappear. The person who sent the flowers would happily come back to report to the Devil Master, saying that the supreme god of flowers should have received yesterday's flowers. Especially in recent days, the person who sent the flowers would always find that the flowers he sent yesterday had disappeared, so he was even happier when he reported to her. Chapter 1834. Shuema also felt that her painstaking efforts were not in vain. She had finally moved him. Perhaps if she worked harder, she would be able to embrace the supreme god. Then, she would be able to happily share a room with him and truly grow up. With this optimistic thought, she wanted her face to recover as soon as possible. Only then could she personally go to him to ask for his hand in marriage. The Sea of Clear Skies was the most beautiful sea in the 6 realms continent. The blue sky, the blue sea, and the golden moon hung in the sky. The sea waves were like colored glass, gently rippling under the moonlight. The most beautiful sea had the most ferocious beasts, tiger, fox, shark. The power of each shark was comparable to the top experts of the immortal and devil realms. They knew magic, could transform, and could even merge into the water. Once they got close to their prey, they would immediately launch all kinds of attacks, killing without leaving a trace. There were all kinds of strange herbs in the sea, but few people dared to pick them. This sea was called the Sea of Death. The kind of grass that Shuema wanted to pick grew on the continental shelf 100 meters under the sea. Shuema was good at fire attacks, but the beasts here were best at water attacks. Water countered fire, so she would be more restrained if she encountered the beasts here. Therefore, she made preparations in advance. She deliberately wore a tight waterproof suit. She couldn't use fire to attack the beasts here, so she could only use swordsmanship. Therefore, she sharpened her sword to the extreme. The scenery here was very beautiful, but she was not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. She stood above the sea and estimated that the water was about 100 meters deep. She was about to jump down. The sound of water splashing could be heard below, and a person slowly rose from the water. Black hair, silver clothes, dark blue eyes. When he appeared, he almost stole the light of the sun and the moon. Shinjuli. Although he emerged from the bottom of the sea, there was not a single drop of water on his body. His wide sleeves spread out in the sea breeze. His posture was not ordinary, free and easy. This person seemed to have the ability to casually stand anywhere and create an excellent scenery. The moment Shuema saw him, her little heart could not help but beat faster. Shuema was still very confident. She immediately took a step forward and smiled brighter than the sun. Supreme God, what a coincidence. We meet again. If fate brings us together, we'll meet even if we're thousands of miles apart. This is really fate that can't be stopped. The moment Shinjoli saw her, he frowned slightly. He didn't say anything and just said, "What are you doing here? Did you follow me here?" She had really wronged her. Shuema immediately smiled brightly. Under the moonlight, a pair of small canine teeth shone brightly. "Jolie, you think too much. I'm here to pick herbs. I didn't expect to meet you here. This must be fate." Shinjoli glanced at her. He obviously did not feel anything for her bright and beautiful smile. He did not say anything and turned to leave. Shuema finally saw him. Naturally, she didn't want to let him go so easily. She flashed and blocked his way. "Jolie, have you received my flowers? Which one do you like? If you tell me, I can give you a special one." She had read in a novel that giving flowers was about sincerity. If you found out that the other party liked that kind of flower, you would give that kind to them. This was called catering to their preferences. Usually, when a beauty felt the sincerity of the person who gave her flowers, she would be excited and marry him. Shinjoli was more beautiful than a beauty. He might feel her sincerity and marry her in excitement. Then, they could sleep together. Her wish could come true. Chapter 1835. The smile on her face couldn't be more sincere, but Shinjoli had the urge to grab her and give her a good beating. What did she take him for? He was good at staying calm. His face was still calm and composed, but his words were as cold as ice. "I don't like any of them. This. You should like one or two, right? Simple and elegant, rich and rich, extraordinary and refined, there are so many different kinds. I don't like flowers." Shinjoli cut her off. Then the green peony and purple linglong that you accepted are. I didn't accept them. Shinjoli's voice was still indifferent. But the flowers that were sent to your door are gone. Didn't you accept them? They were in the way, so they were destroyed. Shinjoli answered with 4 words. These 4 words seemed to be a bit of a blow to Shuema. Her bright eyes dimmed. "So you don't like to accept them?" She was still a bit shocked. After all, it wasn't easy for her to pick those flowers. She even got hurt a few times because of them. She didn't expect that her good intentions would be treated like trash by him. "You don't need to waste your effort. I won't agree to your marriage." Shinjoli was too lazy to talk nonsense with her. After saying this, he turned around and left. Do you think I'm ugly now? I can actually get better," Shuema said unwillingly behind him. It was said that there was a thin veil between a woman and a man. However, the veil between her and Shinjoli was too thick. Shinjoli didn't look back at all. His figure gradually disappeared. Shuema sighed. She was a bit hurt from being rejected by him again and again. She didn't want to chase him anymore. She looked down at the unpredictable sea below her. It was more important to get down to business. With a leap, she jumped down. Hua! A purple figure suddenly rushed up from the sea. At the same time, Shuema was jumping down. Coincidentally, the two of them jumped up and down, and Shuema crashed into that person. The man staggered after being hit. Fortunately, his kung fu was very good. He was not smashed into the sea by Shuema again. Instead, he raised his sleeve and hugged her. After swaying a little, he steadied himself in the air. Then, he looked at the person in his arms. His hand trembled, and he almost threw her into the sea again. So ugly. Shuema's lips twitched. She was indeed disgusted by her current appearance. With a flip of her body, she had already escaped from that person's embrace and was sizing him up a few times. That person was dressed in a gorgeous purple robe. Her features were picturesque, and she had a natural smile on her lips. She was as beautiful as an orchid tree. He looked elegant, and refined. He held a fan in his hand and waved it in the sea breeze. What a show-off! Shuamo replied to him. She had never been at a disadvantage, so naturally, she would not be at a disadvantage with her words. That person smiled. Miss, why did you jump into the sea? Your appearance. Although you are a bit unconventional, you don't have to seek death, right? You should know that life is not easy. This person seemed to be comforting her, but every word and sentence of his was stepping on her sore spot. Shuama had the urge to scratch him. She raised her head. I'm not ugly. I'm just a little hurt. I'm not seeking death. I'm just here to pick herbs. That person touched the fan with his fingers and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Me? Miss, you are. Devil Master Aamo. Shuama introduced herself. She addressed herself as Aamo to the outside world. The name Shuama was only known to a limited number of people. That person's pair of glittering eyes slightly widened, continuously sizing her up. Chapter 1836. He did not expect the little girl in front of him to be the famous Devil Lord. He touched his fan again and bowed. So it's the Devil Lord. I didn't know and have offended you. He looked at Shuama again. Devil Lord's face is. Shuama said, I'm injured, so I need to pick herbs to treat it. The herb you want to pick is the cinnabar orchid. Shuama's eyes lit up slightly and she nodded. It seemed that the cinnabar orchid was indeed the herb to treat her face. The man in front of her also said so. The man frowned slightly. I'm afraid the cinnabar orchid is not easy to pick. There are tiger fox sharks guarding it. Shuama did not care. It doesn't matter. The tiger fox sharks are no match for me. Although Shuama's small face was covered in scars, her eyes were big and round, sparkling brighter than the stars in the sky. Her facial features were also very beautiful, especially when she spoke so proudly. It made people ignore the scars on her face and feel her beauty. She was petite and delicate, with long eyelashes that flickered. It made people want to protect her at first sight. It was easy to arouse a man's desire to protect her. The man's desire to protect her was obviously aroused by her. He blinked slightly and said with a smile, then, does the Devil Lord want me to be your bodyguard? I know a few techniques to deal with the tiger fox sharks. Shuama did not know what politeness was. Her eyelashes curved like the moon, and she agreed readily. Okay. The man did not expect Shuama to agree so readily. He was slightly stunned and looked at her with a complicated gaze. Do you know me? Shuama tilted her head and looked at him. I don't know you. You don't know me, but you dare to let me take the risk with you. The man could not help but ask. Shuama blinked and said very impolitely, why wouldn't I dare? If you dare to play tricks, I'll beat you up. She had rarely met a match in this world. The only one who could be considered a match was probably the supreme divinity. As for the others, her battle record was extremely brilliant. Anyone who refused to submit to her was beaten into submission by her. The man couldn't help but laugh. His smile was as beautiful as the moon. I didn't expect the Devil Lord to be so interesting. It was easy for good-looking men to win people's favor, especially men who liked to smile. Shuama also felt that this man was much more pleasing to the eye. She looked in the direction where Shinjioli had disappeared. Shinjioli had long disappeared. She couldn't even see the corner of his clothes. She was a little disappointed. It was so hard to chase a man. Since the other party was so stubborn, she was at her wit's end. Even if she recovered her looks, he would still treat her coldly, right? He wouldn't let her throw herself into his arms anymore. She looked at the man in front of her again. "You're the Divine Lord's friend. Did you come here with him?" The two of them appeared in the same body of water one after the other, so they should have come together. As for why Shinjuli left without waiting for his companions, had this Almighty ever waited for anyone else? It was always others who followed in his footsteps, okay? If she didn't happen to fall on this man, he would probably have chased after Shinjuli. The man smiled. He seemed to like smiling very much. His smile gave people a feeling of starlight. "Yes, we're friends. Very, very good friends. My name is Tianqin. You can call me Tianqin." "Okay, Tianqin. Since you know that the vermilion light grass is guarded by the tiger fox shark, you must know where it grows. Let's go." Chapter 1837. Shuama was a straightforward person. What she urgently wanted now was to recover her face. Dao Tianchen nodded slightly. "Okay, I'll take you there. The bluer the sky, the darker the sea." When they reached the depths, the sea and sky were already the same color, making it difficult to distinguish between the blue sky and the sea. Dao Tianchen finally stopped. "This is the place." Shuama looked down. The sea here was deep blue like a gem. The snow-white waves rolled and the moonlight spread on the surface of the sea, sparkling like fragments of silver. The scenery here wasn't just any ordinary beauty. Dao Tianchen smiled. "Mo, do you want to enjoy the scenery here before going down?" "No thanks." Shuama was not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. "Let's go down to pick the herbs." Her figure rose, and with a splash, she jumped into the sea. The sea looked so beautiful, but she did not expect it to be so cold. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero, but there was no sign of it freezing. This made Shuama a little unprepared. She shivered as soon as she entered the water. What was even more unexpected was that her waterproof clothes instantly froze the moment she entered the seawater. The clothes stuck to her body, making her feel extremely uncomfortable. She heard the sound of water splashing, and Dao Tianchen landed beside her. Most likely, he was already prepared for this, so he didn't notice anything unusual. Inside the water, he looked at Shuama's pale face and stretched out his arm to gently hug her waist. "I forgot to remind you. It's very cold here. I can warm you up." He grabbed nothing but air. Shuama's body was faintly flowing with red light. After a while, her face returned to normal. "It's okay, I can warm myself." She was obviously using the corresponding magic, and her body seemed to be covered by a layer of light red cover. Dao Tianchen was slightly stunned, and praised with a smile, "Mo's skills are indeed profound." Mo did not buy the compliment, and urged, "Where's the vermilion light grass? Let's go. Follow me." Dao Tianchen swam in front. Dao Tianchen swam in front of them at an extremely fast speed, like a barracuda piercing through the water. Surprisingly, Shuama didn't fall behind and followed closely behind him. She set up a barrier around her body. Although it could keep her body warm and her movements were flexible, it consumed a lot of magic power. After swimming in the water for half an hour, she was a little tired. "Why aren't they here yet?" she couldn't help but ask. Almost there, almost there." Dao Tianchen swam a little slower, side by side with her, and looked at her with concern. "Are you tired? Why don't I take you for a swim?" He reached out his hand to her. His hand was slender and fair, as delicate as jade. This reminded Shuama of Shinjuli's hand. The shape of their hands was very similar. Shuama didn't want him to hold her hand, but when she saw this familiar hand, she couldn't help but reach out her hand for him to hold. However, when he held her hand, she immediately felt the difference between the two. Shinjuli's hand was warm and dry. Every time he held her small hand, she felt warm. However, Dao Tianqin's hand was slightly cold and slippery, probably because they were in the water. His 5 fingers were also much softer than Shinjuli's. When he held her hand, she felt like she was being entangled. So when she felt that something was wrong, she immediately wanted to withdraw her hand. "I'll swim by myself. Don't try to be brave." Dao Tianqin's voice was gentle, but his grip on her hand was strong, and he had no intention of letting her go. Chapter 1838. It was indeed a lot easier for him to swim with her, so Shuama no longer struggled to break free from him. The two of them swam hand in hand like two mermaids. The scene was very harmonious and beautiful. Ning Shuama had been following Shuama Demon Lord unknowingly, so she naturally saw this scene. Little Shuama was really good at fighting, but she was still too inexperienced in dealing with people. She actually trusted a stranger so easily and followed him into such a dangerous area. This Dao Tianqin looked gentle and elegant, handsome and intelligent. He also had an immortal aura around him, so he didn't look like a bad guy. However, a bad guy didn't have bad water painted on his face. It was really dangerous for little Shuama to follow him blindly. Ning Shuama rubbed her eyebrows. She was really naive at that time. If it were her now, she would definitely not follow this person. She might even be on guard against him. Ning Shuama had been watching Dao Tianqin's every move, judging his kung fu through some of his subtle movements. After watching for a while, she raised her eyebrows. This Dao Tianqin seemed to be not much weaker than Shinjuli in terms of appearance and kung fu. If the two of them fought, it would probably be an earth-shattering battle. Was he really friends with Shinjuli? Ning Shuama had deep doubts in her heart. Shinjuli was used to being alone. Other than finding people to play chess with, he rarely traveled with others, not to mention coming here to take a bath with others. Even if Shinjuli was not used to waiting for others, he should have informed Shinjuli through the directed audio talisman if Dao Tianqin and Shuama came out together. Even if Shinjuli was not used to waiting for others, he should have informed Shinjuli through the directed audio talisman. Although this Dao Tianqin was very beautiful and looked like an immortal, Ning Shuama always felt that this person was a little strange, which made her vigilant. If it wasn't for this dream, Ning Shuama wouldn't have known that Dao Tianqin had once existed. It could be seen that this person didn't die in that catastrophe, but had retired. Then what role did he play in that catastrophe? According to the known clues, Ning Shuama couldn't figure it out, so she continued to follow. Mo, where do you live now? Dao Tianqin asked. 35th layer of heaven. Shuama answered straightforwardly. In order to make it easier for her to chase after him, she had specially opened up a territory on the 35th heaven and built a temporary residence just to be closer to him. You are the devil master, why don't you stay in the devil world? I don't like living in the devil world, I like living in the 35th layer of heaven. Shuama still didn't want to reveal her true intentions to outsiders. Dao Tianqin's eyes flickered slightly, and he suddenly smiled. You really don't look like a demon. Do demons have a fixed nature? Shuama retorted. She just wanted to be herself and didn't care what she was. That's a talent. I like it. Dao Tianqin leaned closer to her and kissed her on the hand. This was a little too much. After being educated by Shinjuli, Shuama had learned to keep a distance from men. Being held by the other party was already her bottom line, and now she was being kissed. Although it was just a kiss on the hand, it still made her frown slightly. With a flip of her wrist, she finally pulled her hand out of the other party's grasp. Dao Tianchen's hand was empty, and he looked at her. Ah Mo, your kung fu is really beyond my expectations. It's only been 3 days, and I have a whole new level of respect for you. Shuama glanced at him. You knew me before. Dao Tianchen smiled. In the water, his eyes were as intoxicating as the night. Guess. Chapter 1839. Shuama disliked this kind of guessing game the most. She was also disinclined to continue chatting with this person. Although they had a secret technique that allowed them to casually chat in the water, it was still a bit exhausting, okay? She hadn't picked the herbs yet, so she didn't want to waste any more energy. So she simply shook her head. I hate guessing the most. It's fine if you don't want to say it. Let's go and pick the herbs. Dao Tianchen followed beside her, his voice gentle. Ah Mo, remember, I'll always be good to you. Who would believe that? She just met him, okay? Although he accompanied her to pick the herbs, it was still too early to say this. As a devil master, Shua Mo was usually surrounded by glib tongues. There were many people who tried to curry favor with her, so she had long since become immune to these kinds of words and simply ignored him. Ah Mo, you seem to have something on your mind. If there's something you can't solve, you can tell me, I'll help you solve it. Dao Tianchen smiled warmly. Shuama's heart moved. She glanced at him. Have you ever pursued someone? Dao Tianchen fixed his gaze on her. Yes, I think so. This sentence was too ambiguous. Shuama hated people who didn't speak straightforwardly. She snorted. If you don't want to say it, then forget it. Dao Tianchen sighed and reached out his hand, as if he wanted to touch her hair, but he stopped halfway and smiled, this time answering with certainty, yes. Then have you caught up with him? How are you going to do it? Shuama's eyes sparkled. Dao Tianchen smiled softly and said, good girls are afraid of pestering men. If you can't catch up, then it's because you haven't pestered him enough. Shuama was a bit distressed. I've been pestering him for so long. But maybe she hadn't pestered him enough. Then she would work harder after her injury was healed. Dao Tianchen suddenly said, we're here. Shuama looked up and saw a large patch of blue seaweed at the bottom of the sea. In the middle of the blue patch, there were 5 stalks of vermilion grass that shone like corals. The grass had its own fluorescent glow, and there were ginseng flower petals growing on top. This must be the vermilion grass. Shuama's eyes lit up. She pulled out her sword and slowly swam towards one of the vermilion orchids. She got closer. She got even closer. Shuama looked around. Why hadn't the tiger-fox shark come out yet? Didn't they say that there were many tiger-fox sharks here? Why didn't she see any of them? Could it be that they had sensed the scent of their devil master and knew that they could not afford to provoke her, so they ran away in fear? Although she didn't see the tiger-fox shark, she could clearly feel that the surrounding seawater was getting colder and colder. Even if she was in her own enchantment, she still wanted to shiver from the cold. Hey, where's the tiger-fox shark you were talking about? Shuama turned around and asked, but her eyes suddenly widened. Dao Tianchen, who had been chatting and smiling with her just now, had disappeared without a trace. There was only the rippling of the deep blue sea around her. Strange, where did this person go? He actually disappeared without a trace. She was about to look for him, but suddenly she seemed to have sensed something. Her body suddenly rushed forward. She moved 10 feet away out of thin air, and a huge mouth suddenly closed at the place where she was standing just now. Tiger-fox shark. Its body was streamlined like a shark, the patterns on its body were like tiger stripes, and its head was like a fox's head. Its sharp mouth had jagged fangs. It looked very delicate when it closed its mouth, but once it opened, it looked like a snake, and people could only see its bloody mouth. Shuama had no doubt that if she was bitten by this thing just now, she was afraid that half of her body would be gone. Because of the appearance of this thing, the surrounding seawater became colder, and there were even signs of freezing. Chapter 1840. Every time Shuama paddled in the water, she felt as if she was swimming in ice. Her speed slowed down a lot. Not only did this monster have the ability to freeze seawater, but it could also turn invisible. When it missed its target, it instantly melted into the surrounding seawater and disappeared. Shuama was a devil master after all. Her martial arts were not ordinary. She activated her eyesight and finally saw a slightly darker color in the surrounding seawater. It was the shape of the tiger fox shark. It was quickly approaching her without making any sound. Obviously, it still wanted to launch a surprise attack. Shuama clenched her sword tightly. She did not seem to see the tiger fox shark and quickly approached the cinnabar orchid. People would only be nervous when facing unknown danger. Once the danger became real, they would be able to deal with it calmly. Shuama decided to pick the grass first. Just as her hand was about to touch the vermilion grass, the grass suddenly moved and disappeared in a split second. A huge mouth appeared in its original place. Shuama's reaction was really fast. She retracted her hand at lightning speed. The fangs in the huge mouth almost grazed her skin. It turned out that the cinnabar orchid was not real grass. It was the tongue of the tiger fox shark. This thing could hide its entire body in the water and only reveal a tongue that looked like the cinnabar orchid to trick people. Since there were already 2 tiger fox sharks, would there be more hiding in the dark? Shuama's gaze turned to the remaining 4 cinnabar orchids. How many of them were real? She had never seen the cinnabar orchid before. She had only heard about it from others. Therefore, she could not tell if the cinnabar orchid in front of her were real or fake. Picking the cinnabar orchid could not be done with any utensils. It could only be picked by hand. Moreover, it could not be damaged in any way. Otherwise, it would lose its effect. Therefore, Shuama could not use a hidden weapon to test it. She could only touch the cinnabar orchid one by one. The tiger fox shark was as cunning as a fox. If it did not bite, it would immediately turn invisible and wait for a chance to attack again. Shuama pursed her lips. She stayed in the same spot and seemed to be in a daze. A tiger fox shark swam silently. When it was in front of her, it slowly opened its mouth, a schwa. With the sound of water splashing, a cold sword light flashed in Shuama's hand. With a puff, it directly pierced into the big mouth, turning and stirring. A shrill scream came from the water, and blood spurted out from that big mouth. The tiger fox shark's tongue seemed to be its vital point. With its vital point cut off, the tiger fox shark let out a sharp cry and flipped over in the water. Shuama smirked. She wanted to plot against her. No way. She had killed a tiger fox shark, and it seemed that the other one was stunned as well. The tiger fox shark began to retreat silently. Shuama blinks her eyes and her figure flashes as she pounces towards that tiger fox shark. If she could break them one by one, then she would break them one by one. She wanted to force out the other tiger fox sharks that were hiding in the dark. Once she fought with her life on the line, even the tyrant tiger fox shark in this area of water would not be her opponent. She actually caught up to him in the blink of an eye and slashed at him with her sword. That tiger fox shark couldn't dodge in time and was struck in the head. Then, the sword seemed to have cut into oil as it slid to the side. That tiger fox shark's skin was not cut at all. After being stunned for a moment, it let out a sharp cry. This time, it was a proud cry. It no longer opened its mouth and swung its tail in the water. The surrounding seawater actually turned into sharp ice arrows and shot toward Shuamo. Chapter 1841. Shuamo spun her sword and created a protective barrier around her body. When the ice arrows hit the barrier, they made a deafening sound. After a dense circle of ice arrows shot out, Shuamo was turned into a hedgehog-like ice ball. She could no longer move. The tiger fox shark circled around the ice ball, but the little person inside the ice ball didn't move at all. It was as if she was shot to death by the ice arrows. The tiger fox shark's egg-like eyes emitted a greedy light. It opened its mouth and wanted to swallow the ice ball. However, the change happened in an instant. The girl inside the ice ball suddenly moved. A cold sword light came out from the ice ball and shot into the tiger fox shark's mouth. The tiger fox shark let out a shrill cry that was even more ear-piercing than the previous one. Half of its tongue was cut off. The tiger fox shark had to cut off its entire tongue to kill it. Only cutting off half of its tongue was enough to seriously injure it. This tiger fox shark was probably in extreme pain. It kept rolling around and screaming, shaking the surrounding seawater to the point that it sounded like a pot of boiling water. Shuamo jumped on its head and stabbed its eyes and nostrils with her sword from time to time as if she was venting her anger. Although the tiger fox shark's skin could withstand any kind of attack, its eyes and nostrils were still relatively weak. Moreover, the Devil Lord's strength was not to be underestimated. Every time she stabbed, it would draw a line of blood, making the tiger fox shark roll around and scream even louder. This was a method of killing the chicken to scare the monkey. The other tiger fox sharks that hadn't shown up yet began to tremble and quietly retreat. There were originally 4 vermilion orchids on the green grassland, but now, 3 of them had automatically disappeared. Obviously, the 3 vermilion orchids were fake. They were the tiger fox shark's tongues. Shuamo looked at the only vermilion orchids left in the northwest corner and narrowed her big eyes. She finally found the real vermilion orchids. She was indeed the smartest. She smiled until her eyes were squinted, and 2 dimples appeared on her cheeks. She finished off the tiger fox shark that she had tortured until it was half dead. Then, she turned around and swam towards the vermilion orchids. She was going to freeze to death. She wanted to end the battle quickly, pick the vermilion orchid, and run. She did not want to waste any more time here. This place was really too cold. Her clothes were frozen into iron. As she swam, the clothes on her body began to fall off piece by piece. Her attention was focused on the vermilion orchid and she didn't notice the problem with her clothes. Her body was already numb from the cold, so she couldn't feel whether she was wearing anything or not. Her swimming speed was not slow. Soon, she reached the side of the vermilion orchid and reached out her small hand to pluck it. Vermilion orchid grass. You're finally mine. Swoosh. A white light suddenly flashed by and struck the only remaining stalk of vermilion light grass with a loud smack. The water rippled slightly, and the vermilion light grass broke off. It withered in the blink of an eye and disappeared. Bastard! Who had plotted against her precious grass? Shuamo turned around angrily, but before she could see anything clearly, something fell from the sky and covered her from head to toe. Shuamo was shocked. The speed of this thing was too fast. She didn't even have time to dodge. She didn't even see what was covering her. All she could see was white. She was about to pull the thing off when she heard the sound of water splashing. Then, she felt a grip on her waist and heard a familiar voice, "Be good, don't move." Chapter 1842. Just as she was about to pull it off, she heard the sound of water splashing. Then, she felt a grip on her waist and heard a familiar voice, "Be good and don't move." Shuamo widened her eyes. Shinjioli. It was Shinjuli's voice. She pulled the top of her head with her small hands and finally revealed her head. She then realized that she was wrapped in a large robe and was being held in Shinjuli's arms. The robe was so big that it wrapped her up so tightly that not even her toes could be seen. She couldn't be more familiar with the material and texture of the robe. It was Shinjuli's outer robe. Not only was the robe comfortable, it was also very warm. It quickly warmed up her cold skin. Shuema was very surprised. "Jiuli, where did you come from?" Suddenly, she remembered the herb she had been longing for. She quickly looked in that direction, but there wasn't even a single blade of grass left. "Why did you destroy my grass?" She recognized the technique he used. He was the one who released the white light. Shinjuli didn't even look at her and didn't intend to answer her question. His left arm hugged the restless Shuemo while his right hand transformed into a sword. He slashed in a direction, "Come out." The sword light caused the water in that direction to rise like a wall. A purple figure appeared in the water wall. It was Dao Tianqin who had just disappeared. A cinnabar orchid was blooming at his fingertips. He smiled and said, "Jiuli, we haven't seen each other for a long time. It's not good to release such a big move, right?" His gaze fell on Shuemo and he smiled even more gently. "Mo, didn't you want the cinnabar orchid? Come and get it." Shuemo looked at Dao Tianqin and then turned to look at Shinjuli. She was obviously confused, but she was still very obsessed with the cinnabar orchid. She stared at the grass with her big eyes. "So you've already picked this long ago?" Dao Tianqin smiled faintly, and his voice became even softer. "I said that I will help you." He flicked his finger, and the stalk of grass floated toward Shuemo. Its speed was quite fast. Shuemo subconsciously struggled out of Shinjuli's arms and wanted to catch it. Shinjuli waved his sleeve and the grass disappeared. "Shuemo, why do you always destroy my grass?" Shuemo's eyes widened. "It's poisonous." Shinjuli. "Ugh." Shuemo turned to Dao Tianqin, "You lied to me." Dao Tianqin, a glimmer of light flashed through his eyes and he raised his hand to rub his forehead. Mo, you trust him that much? You think it's poisonous just because he said so? Maybe he just doesn't want you to take my things, or maybe he doesn't want you to return to your original appearance. This sentence was very provocative, but Mo didn't buy it. He's not as stupid as you. I trust him. Dao Tianqin. This little girl really trusted Shinjuli more than a little. She's just a child, Luo Jiuqin. Don't put your ideas on her. Shinjuli's voice was cold, but it was full of warning. Child. Shinjuli, maybe you only see her as a child, but I already see her as a woman. She's really to my liking. Dao Tianqin, no, Luo Jiuqin smiled and looked at Shuemo with eyes so gentle that it seemed to melt. Mo, I really like you. But I don't like you. Chapter 1843. I don't like you. Shuemo said crisply. You don't even have a real name. He actually gave her a fake name. The smile on Luo Jiuqin's face didn't change. His words were still filled with tenderness. Mo, a name is just a code. But my heart for you will never change. Before he could finish his words, a white light shot towards him, accompanied by Shinjuli's cold voice. You can say these flowery words to other women. Luo Jiuqin waved his fan, and a blue light flew out to meet the white light. There was an earth-shattering sound, and a bottomless whirlpool appeared where the white light and blue light collided, causing the surrounding seawater to be crazily sucked into it. Shuemo's hair was also blown up by the whirlpool. If it wasn't for Shinjuli holding her, perhaps her small body would have been sucked in by the whirlpool. She had been in the water for too long, and she had used up too much of her MF. Now that she was being sucked in by the whirlpool, she couldn't breathe. Her small face was a little pale, and she struggled in Shinjuli's arms. He was holding her so tightly that she couldn't breathe. After the loud sound, Luo Jiuchen disappeared, as if he had been swept away by the whirlpool. "Don't move, I'll bring you up." Shinjuli's voice was still cold, but he raised his hand to gather her hair that was flying around and causing her scalp to hurt. His body moved, and he brought her up. Shuama hadn't been in his arms for a long time. At this time, she took advantage of the situation and hugged his waist like an octopus. She leaned her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat in the water. She loved this feeling so much. Her arms tightened around him, and she nuzzled her head against his chest again. Being hugged like this, Shinjuli's body slightly stiffened. His arms moved as if he wanted to do something, but he inadvertently looked down at her long, curly eyelashes and her small, satisfied mouth. He gave up and brought her up directly. She didn't know if it was because she was wrapped in his robe, but Shuama's body was getting warmer and warmer, making her a little anxious and short of breath. She couldn't breathe in the water. Originally, she used a spell to breathe through her skin like a fish, but she didn't know what was going on, but that ability suddenly disappeared. She immediately felt suffocated. At this time, she was more than 100 meters deep. Because of the water pressure, the two couldn't go up too quickly or their bodies. Hence, Shinjuli carried her at a normal speed. They couldn't reach the surface. As Shinjuli carried her up the stairs, he suddenly felt that something was wrong with her. He looked down and saw that her lips were tightly pursed and her face was flushed red. She was trying her best to break free from him and climb up the stairs by herself. What's going on? Shinjuli then realized that not only was she in danger of suffocating, but her body was also burning hot. After a while, she finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She opened her mouth slightly, wanting to breathe. She was simply asking to be choked by opening her mouth to breathe in the water. But she couldn't care less in this situation where she was suffocating. She had just opened her mouth, but before she could choke on the first mouthful of water, the shadow in front of her darkened, and her lips were covered by someone. Then, a breath of life-saving air blew into her mouth. She greedily inhaled this breath of air, and used her nose to exhale the foul air in her body. She blew a stream of bubbles in the water. Chapter 1844. She greedily inhaled the breath and exhaled the foul air from her body through her nose. She blew a stream of bubbles in the water. With this breath, her drowsy mind finally cleared up a little. She opened her eyes and saw a handsome face in front of her. His lips were on hers, and when she opened her eyes, her long eyelashes brushed against his cheeks. He suddenly raised his head and looked down at her apple-like face. "Are you feeling better?" She nodded, and her eyes were sparkling. "I was just passing air to you. Don't think too much." Shinjuli spoke again. Shuama blinked. She knew that he was passing air to her. How could she think too much? What could she think? She didn't know what was going on. Her body was soft, and even her magic had disappeared. Naturally, she couldn't speak in the water. But her eyes were too pure, and all her emotions were written in them. Shinjuli easily guessed what she was thinking. He was suffocating. So he was thinking too much. Shuamo really liked the feeling of passing on air. Earlier, when his lips were on hers, not only did it release her from suffocation, it also made her hot and dry body feel a trace of indescribable coolness. In front of him, she didn't know how to hide her emotions, and her actions were much more casual. So she felt that it would make her feel more comfortable. She immediately wanted to feel more comfortable. She raised her head and took the initiative to find his lips, wanting him to pass air to her. Shinjuli was very stingy. After passing air to her, he refused to pass air to her again. He said, "Bear with it." His speed suddenly increased. After a while, he finally came out of the water with her in his arms. A large amount of fresh air rushed in, and Shuema breathed in big mouthfuls of air. The problem of breathing was solved, but there was another problem that needed to be solved. She was too hot. Her whole body was uncomfortably hot. She raised her hand and tore off the robe on her body. Her movements were too fast. When Shinjuli realized, half of the robe on her body had already been torn off. Half of her shoulders and chest were exposed. Because she had to painstakingly maintain the appearance of a 12 or 13-year-old, her body had yet to fully develop. Her breasts were not even as big as a steamed bun. Her waterproof red clothes had been destroyed very artistically. There were holes everywhere, and the parts that should not be exposed were all exposed. The parts that could be exposed were covered very tightly. It was just like the sexy clothes now. It was just that she didn't realize it. Shinjioli held his breath and raised his hand to wrap her tightly again. "Don't move. I'm hot." Her pair of watery eyes looked at him, her little face was abnormally pink, and even the breath she exhaled from her little mouth was scorching hot. She was drugged with an aphrodisiac. Damn it. Shinjioli's eyes darkened as he cursed under his breath. The little fellow in his arms was becoming more and more restless under the effects of the drug. He clamped her hands, and she used her soft little body to rub against him. She desperately tried to burrow into his arms. "I'm hot, hot, hot." Shuema obviously didn't know what was going on with her. She only felt that the blood in her body was boiling. Only by leaning against him did she feel a little better. She wanted to tear off the robe on her body, but Shinjioli held her hands tightly, so she couldn't do it. She couldn't help but become very anxious and struggled in his arms. Shinjioli flew up with her. He had brought a lot of drugs with him, but he didn't have an antidote for this. He needed to refine it on land. Chapter 1845. Shuema could not break away from his embrace. When she raised her head, she saw his beautiful chin. Her heart warmed, and an inexplicable desire overwhelmed her. She could not help but raise her head and kiss his chin. "Behave yourself." Shinjioli reprimanded her. He tried to raise his chin as high as possible to break away from the poison of her little mouth. Since she was drugged, he could not hit her acupuncture points to let her sleep. Otherwise, the poison would linger in her 8 extraordinary meridians and be harder to cure. As soon as he raised his head, her little mouth landed on his neck and kissed his Adam's apple. Shinjioli almost threw her out. He roughly pressed her into his arms and said, "Be good." Shuema's little face was buried in his arms. Her nose was filled with the unique cold fragrance of his body. She was not immune to his body's fragrance. Now, under the influence of the drug, she could not control herself. She wanted to kiss him. She rubbed her little face on his chest. Shinjioli was only wearing his inner robe at the moment. She rubbed against him and opened his clothes. His chest felt cold and then hot. The cold was because of the wind, and the hot was because her little mouth kissed him again. She kissed him on his well-defined skin. Shinjioli's arm stiffened. He quickly pulled her away from his arms. With a flick of his fingers, his clothes were fastened again. This time, even his neck was covered, so she could not kiss him. "Devil Master, be more serious." His tone was a little strict, just like how he reprimanded her when she made a mistake when she was a child. Shuema was in a daze. She felt as if she had returned to her childhood. She felt uncomfortable, hot, and empty. This kind of discomfort made her anxious and aggrieved. When she was young and was by his side, Whenever he wanted to punish her for something she wanted or made a mistake, she only needed to cry a little and his heart would soften. The punishment would be lighter and he would give her the thing she wanted without any hesitation. She had subconsciously grasped this pattern, so she could not help but use it at this moment. Her small mouth flattened and tears rolled down from her big eyes. "I feel terrible, Jolie, I feel terrible. I don't want to wear your clothes, they're too hot." Although her small face was still covered in bruises, she still looked pitiful, especially when she was crying. Those tears seemed to drip into one's heart. "You've been poisoned. It's not because of your clothes. I'll take you to detoxify the poison. Just bear with it for a while." Shinjioli rarely opened his mouth to explain. Unfortunately, the aphrodisiac was too strong. Shuima was already a little dazed and couldn't understand what he was saying. She was still desperately trying to get into his arms, her body was burning hot, and she kept twisting and turning. Shinjioli, who had always been calm, finally felt a little breathless. He sighed. In the end, he lifted his hand and sealed her acupoints. He didn't make her fall asleep, but only made her unable to move her limbs. She finally became obedient in his arms and stopped moving. However, because her body was too uncomfortable, she couldn't express it anymore. She just stared at him with her eyes wide open. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked very wronged. Shinjioli moved his eyes away and said coldly, "Are you an idiot? You even believe the words of strangers. Now you're going to suffer." Although he was reprimanding her, he flew even faster. Ning Shuima had been following them in the air. Everything fell into her eyes. She faintly felt that she wasn't dreaming. If she was dreaming, it would be very messy. Chapter 1846. She vaguely felt like she wasn't dreaming. Dreams were usually very messy, but her dream was very organized. She had always been an invisible spectator. It felt like she had traveled back in time 50,000 years after her soul left her body. Everything she saw was very real, but no one in this world could discover her. No matter how powerful someone was, they wouldn't be able to discover her. This was a good thing. She could get close to him infinitely, but unfortunately, she couldn't get close, because she was only a spectator. Ning Shuima, as a spectator, was much more rational than the person involved. Her eyes greedily looked at Shinjioli. Looking at his handsome side profile, she couldn't bear to look away. In reality, she couldn't see him again. No matter how much she missed him or looked for him, he wouldn't appear again. But in this dream, she could finally see him to her heart's content. Or perhaps, he was her poison. She would never get tired of looking at him, the only pity was that she couldn't touch him. She actually wanted to jump into his arms and hug his waist again, but when she jumped over, she would directly pass through his body. She couldn't make any physical contact with him. However, being able to follow him at such a close distance, she could feel a trace of satisfaction. She faintly heard someone calling out to her, but that voice seemed to be separated by thousands of mountains and rivers. She couldn't tell whose voice it was, but she vaguely felt that the voice was asking her to go back, to wake her up, but this dream was so beautiful, and he was so real in the dream. She didn't want to go back, and she didn't want to wake up. She deliberately ignored the call and continued to follow Shinjioli. Seeing her other self interact with the man she loved with her own eyes was a very strange feeling. Of course, this wasn't jealousy. On the contrary, when she saw Shinjioli hugging her other self, her heart felt very warm. At the same time, she could rationally analyze it. The current Shinjioli probably only treated Shuima as a child that he had raised. He didn't have any feelings for her. Although this child was quite capable, and had even become the demon master, in his eyes, a child would always be a child. Although Shuama kept saying that she wanted to marry him, and even sent him a marriage proposal, he only treated it as a child's willfulness, and did not really take it to heart. Of course, he still took good care of this child. On the surface, he was cold to her, but when she was in danger, he would still save her. He had clearly left just now, but for some reason, he turned back and saved Shuama at a critical moment. As for that Luo Jiuchen, Ning Shuama thought about it, but she still hadn't heard of him, but it wasn't strange. Those people and things from 50,000 years ago were completely destroyed. Even the story of Shinjiuli, the supreme divinity and the devil lord had only been passed down a little, let alone a minor character like Luo Jiuchen. However, Luo Jiuchen's kung fu was surprisingly high. From the fight between Shinjiuli and him just now, it could be seen that the two of them were actually evenly matched. Shinjiuli was slightly better than the other, but it was very limited. If they really fought, it would be impossible to determine the winner if the two of them didn't turn the sky and the earth upside down. And from the conversation between Shinjiuli and him, the two of them had known each other for a long time. And the way they got along was very strange. They were neither enemies nor friends. And although Luo Jiuchen's actions were a little evil, the way he attacked was very righteous. He should be a cultivator. Chapter 1847. Ordinary cultivators could only kneel down and kowtow to Shinjiuli when they saw him. Even the celestial emperor had to stand with his hands down and speak respectfully when he saw him. How could this person be so rude? Moreover, it was already very heaven-defying for his martial arts to reach such a high level. What was his origin? Was he also a god? No, it seemed that there was only one god, and it was impossible for a second one to appear. Moreover, his attitude toward Shuama was also very strange. His words were quite ambiguous, and it didn't seem like he was simply flirting with a little girl. Of course, this person looked like a show-off, as if he was a hedonistic son of a wealthy family who often took liberties with women from good families for fun. She couldn't rule out the possibility that after knowing Shuama's identity, he would take the opportunity to take liberties with this little devil master. However, what did he mean by a scholar who has been away for 3 days should be looked at with new eyes? From his words, it seemed like he had known Shuama in the past. Could it be that Shuama had interacted with him before? But with Shuama's temperament, if she had interacted with this person before, it was impossible for her not to recognize him. She had clearly seen him for the first time. Or was this person just saying it casually? Ning Shuama was puzzled. When she looked up again, she found that the scene in front of her had changed. The bed curtain was flowing with light ripples, and the screen was painted with Buddhist lotuses. The scene in front of her was very familiar to Ning Shuama. This was the side hall of the Fantian Palace. She had once slept for a night and dreamed of the past 50,000 years in this side hall. It turned out that more than 50,000 years ago, Shuama had come to this Fantian Palace. Ning Shuama looked down and saw little Shuama lying on the bed, unable to move, but her face was getting redder and redder, and her breathing was getting more and more rapid. Shinjiuli was not here. He must have gone to refine the antidote for her. Little Shuama was in great pain. She was still wearing Shinjiuli's loose white robe. She felt scorching hot, inexplicably empty, and irritable. She felt as if there were many insects crawling in her veins, making her whole body itch unbearably. This kind of itch was different from the itch she was allergic to. This kind of itch seemed to directly invade her heart, making her blood boil. To prevent her from moving around, Shinjiuli sealed her acupoints. It was not good for her body to seal her acupoints at this time, so he sealed her acupoints very gently. Little Shuama's blood was flowing fast, so she violently attacked the sealed acupoints. Ning Shuama looked at her from the air and saw her subconscious intention. She couldn't help but fly over. No! You can't attack your acupoints or else you'll go berserk. Of course, little Shuama didn't hear her. Her body trembled even more violently. After a while, her body suddenly shook and she jumped up from the bed. Obviously, her acupoints were unsealed. The light at the door dimmed, and Shinjuli walked in. Before he could see the situation in the room clearly, little Shuama had already rushed over like a cannonball and wrapped herself around his body like an octopus. Shinjuli's body stiffened. At this time, little Shuama had already removed all the restraints on her body. She was completely naked, and she had completely lost her mind. After hugging him, she immediately searched for his lips with her lips. Julie, hug me, she was like a burning charcoal, clinging to him tightly. Shinjuli wanted to pull her away, but he couldn't find a place to touch. Everywhere he touched was smooth and hot. Perhaps it was the effect of the medicine, or perhaps she was self-taught, but her little hands began to grope around his body. Chapter 1848. Shinjuli shook his arms and a white light flashed. Little Shuama, who was tightly wrapped around him, flew out and fell into the quilt. The quilt automatically rolled over and wrapped around her tightly, making her unable to move. Her acupoints were sealed again, and this time it was quite heavy. It was difficult for her to even blink, let alone move her hands and feet. Shinjuli's breath was slightly unstable. He walked over and looked down at her little face, which was flushed with blood. Now you've learned your lesson. Don't trust others so easily just because you're good at martial arts. This world is not as simple as you think. Strong fists can't solve all problems. As he lectured her, he stuffed a purple pill into her mouth. Eat it. You'll be fine after eating it. Shinjuli was very confident in the pill he had refined. After little Shuama swallowed the pill, he said, "Have a good rest. You'll be fine after a good night's sleep." Then, he turned around and left. Ning Shuama, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but touch her eyebrows. Almighty, you should at least wait for her to be cured before leaving. She was already burning hot, and now that she was wrapped in such a blanket and her acupoints were sealed, the blood in her body was blocked. From a medical point of view, it was very easy for her to go berserk like this. As if to verify Ning Shuama's medical theory, little Shuama's little face, which was lying in the quilt, became redder and redder. 10 minutes later, her nose, mouth, the corners of her eyes, and ears began to bleed. This was a typical case of bleeding from the 7 orifices. Ning Shuama wanted to help her unseal her acupoints and lift the quilt, but she couldn't do it. Besides watching from the side, she couldn't do anything useful. She wanted to rush out and call for help, but this dream was very strange. She seemed to be imprisoned by little Shuama's side and couldn't go anywhere. She could only stay in this room. And she was even more surprised to find that the pill that Shinjuli fed little Shuama was obviously ineffective. An hour had passed, and her face was already blue and purple. The extreme pain made her like a fish out of water. She opened her mouth wide, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make a sound. Ning Shuama's heart was also tightly curled up. After all, this was her previous life. To be exact, it was not her previous life, but her past. Because she had now recovered her identity as the Devil Master, and her body was the body of a devil. Although she had forgotten what happened 50,000 years ago, it was now in front of her eyes. She could still feel the pain at that time. It was a pain worse than death. All the blood vessels in his body felt like they were about to burst. He was like a balloon filled with air, ready to explode at any moment. This was not an ordinary aphrodisiac drug. Although it was an aphrodisiac, it was very well, it was, and to see it. If she couldn't really get rid of it, this little devil master might really die here. Ning Xuema couldn't help but look out the window again and again, hoping that Shinjioli would quickly come back to take a look. She didn't know how much time had passed, but it seemed as long as a century. The door of the hall opened again, and Shinjioli appeared at the door with his white clothes fluttering in the wind. Better, his words suddenly stopped. He rushed over like lightning. Xuema. Xuema's palm-sized face was already dripping with blood, and the blue veins on her face were popping out. Her mouth was wide open, and it seemed that she was already exhaling more than she was inhaling. Chapter 1849. Shinjioli lifted her up and unsealed her sealed acupoints with a slap on his palm. Wah! The moment Xuema's acupoint was unsealed, she spat out a mouthful of blood. She spat out large mouthfuls of blood. Shinjioli's hands were trembling as he hugged her. He couldn't care about anything else and pressed his palm on her naked back, wanting to help her tidy up her blood vessels. However, the blood vessels in her body seemed to have gone berserk. The moment his palm touched her, it was bounced off by the power in her body. Her eyes were red, and she used all her strength to push him away. Let go. The strength in her palm wasn't small. Under the surge of devil power, Shinjioli's body swayed slightly. And because of this palm, her already weak blood vessels couldn't take it anymore. She spat out blood again, and her body went limp. Her face turned pale, and she collapsed in his arms. She closed her eyes, and no one knew if it was blood or tears that rolled down from the corners of her eyes. Ning Xuema looked at all of this, and she didn't know what to feel in her heart. At that time, she had indeed gone mad, resulting in many of her blood vessels breaking apart. She was lucky that she didn't lose her life. A hint of apology flashed past Shinjioli's eyes. I'm sorry. She was still naked, and Shinjioli couldn't be bothered to help her put on her clothes. He laid her flat on the bed, and like playing a pipa, he tapped all the important acupoints on her body. A handsome young man dressed in white, and a young girl who was completely naked. This scene was actually very imaginative. Ning Xuema sat in front of Shinjioli attentively, watching him busy. Even though the great god didn't have that kind of feeling for her at that time, he still cared about her a lot, right? According to Mother Earth, only gods and devils falling in love would attract the purple fiend disaster. In that case, the two of them had already fallen in love 50,000 years ago, right? Shinjioli's medical expertise was already at the point of perfection at that time. After he connected Xuema's broken blood vessels, he casually put on a robe for her and carried her out of the door. Where was he taking her? Ning Xuema was a little puzzled, so she followed behind. When Ning Xuema first saw the layout of the hall and guessed that this was the Fantion Palace, she was a little uncertain. At this moment, after walking a small circle outside, she was finally completely sure that this was indeed Fantion Palace. The lake was suffused with rainbow-colored clouds, the pavilion of tortoiseshell, all of them were extremely familiar to him. Looking at Shinjioli walking quickly in front of her, Ning Xuema couldn't help but tear up. The Shinjioli in this world couldn't see her, but the Shinjioli in the other world had already disappeared. Compared to never being able to see him again, she would rather stay in this dream, even if she had to keep looking at him and not be able to hug him. She ran to his back and wrapped her arms around his waist. Of course, she could only hug him weakly, because if she used a little strength, her arms would pass through his body. In this dream, she could only hug herself. Jolie. She whispered in her throat like a fool. Her arms hugged him weakly as if she was really close to him. Great God, she murmured the old way of addressing him, I really miss you. How can I make you come back? She really missed his embrace. She really wanted him to hug her. In the side hall of the Fantion Palace, Shen Yanma was guarding by the bed, his little hand tightly holding the hand of the person on the bed. Chapter 1850. Shin Nyenma stayed by the bed and held the hand of the person on the bed tightly. He cried, "Mother! Mother!" His mother vomited blood and fainted in front of the palace gate. Shin Nyenma was small and weak. He did not want anyone to touch his mother, so he had to do it himself. However, his strength was limited, so he had to drag his mother to the side hall that was closest to the palace gate. It was not easy to get his mother onto the bed. He was almost sweating from exhaustion. He called out to her a few times. Seeing that she still hadn't woken up, he hurriedly ran to his father's bedroom to look at the bottles and jars his father had left behind. He found a few types of medicine to treat internal and external injuries and ran back with them all. He was too anxious. When he ran, he tripped on a stone under his feet and fell. He held the medicine bottle tightly in his arms, so it did not break. He only hurt his knees. He did not care about it. He got up and ran again. His mother was still waiting for him to save her life. He had already lost his father, so he did not want to lose his mother too. After all, Shin Nyenma was still young and had not really learned any medical skills. Ning Shuema was severely injured by Mother Earth. When she was breaking the array of Mingling, she was stabbed by the weapon used by Mingling. That kind of weapon contained a very strong poison. On the surface, nothing could be seen. Even the blood that flowed out after being stabbed was bright red. However, the poison had already crawled to all parts of her blood vessels. When she was awake, she could use her magic to suppress it. However, when she was unconscious, she could not control it anymore. Her body was getting colder and colder. There was even a layer of frost on her body, which slowly turned into ice. Shin Nyenma did not know how to deal with this illness. When he saw the sword wounds on his mother's body, he could only cry and apply a layer of medicine on her wounds. When he saw that there was no improvement, he let her take it orally. After he used everything, he realized that his mother did not have any signs of waking up. She did not even breathe. He was really scared. He did not care that her hand was cold to the bone. He held her hand tightly and did not let go. He cried and shouted, "Mother! Mother! Wake up! You can't abandon me, Mother, I'm scared. Mother, give me a hug. I will warm you up." He desperately tried to squeeze into her arms and tried to warm her body with his little body. He was shivering in her arms from the cold. His lips were pale, but he refused to let go. His cries attracted the attention of the 8 mythological beasts. The most knowledgeable one, Baizé, had followed the Divine Lord for so many years. It knew some medical knowledge. It looked at the mother and daughter lying on the bed and transformed into a human form. Then, it carried out the little fellow who was almost frozen. "Little master! You can't do this." Shin Nyenma's hands and feet were frozen, but he still did not want to leave his mother's arms. He struggled in Baizé's hands. "I want to warm my mother up. She will wake up when I am warm." Baizé said, "Little master, the devil master was injured by Yin poison. She can't be warmed up by body heat. Then how do we wake her up?" In the past, the Divine Lord used to use his power to expel the Yin poison. This is very costly. Shin Nyenma's eyes widened. He immediately wanted to jump on the bed. "Then, I will use my power to expel the poison from my mother. What should I do?" Baizé hurriedly pulled him back. "Little master, this person needs to be at least at the 6th level of the heaven rank. If you don't have enough telekinesis, you won't be able to do it." Chapter 1851. Can you do it? No, we are only at the 3rd level of the heavenly level. We can't do it. You can't do it even if you join forces. We can't do it. Bai Zhe heard from the Divine Lord that the detoxification must be controlled properly. A little bit more will endanger the patient's life, and a little bit less will not work. If we join forces, we will not be able to save the Devil Master. We may even worsen her injury. What should we do? Shen Yanma's eyes were already filled with tears. Mother won't abandon me, will she? Bai Zhe pondered for a moment. Perhaps I should look for the Celestial Emperor. I remember that his power of will has reached the 6th level of the heavenly level. Shen Yanma shook his head. No, I am afraid that the Celestial Emperor will not try his best to save Mother. Bai Zhe was stunned and slapped his forehead. How could he forget about this? The Celestial Emperor did not really want the Devil Master to be well. It was hard to say if he would sincerely treat the Devil Master. What if he came and used a little trick? His young master was so young, but he actually knew about this. Bai Zhe raised his head to look at the frozen Ning Xuema on the bed. Suddenly, he thought of something and slapped his forehead. The Divine Venerable once said that in the future, if I encounter an emergency that I can't solve, I can look for someone. Who? A hermit who lives in seclusion. The Divine Lord said that if we ring the divine bell at the highest peak of the Fanteon Palace 10 times, that person will appear. Shen Yanma immediately jumped up and ran out. What are we waiting for? Go and ring the bell. The pattern of the bell was very simple, and there were words engraved on it that no one could recognize. No matter how strong the wind was, it could not move the bell at all. Shen Yanma used to come here to play, so he was naturally curious when he saw the bell. He used to pick up the bell hammer next to him to strike it, but no matter how hard he tried, there was no sound. However, it was different this time. With Bai Zhe by his side, he learned that there was a set of very complicated incantations to ring the bell. A person with the blood of God had to recite the incantations and then ring the bell. Shen Yanma had a good memory, and he was eager to save his mother. Therefore, Bai Zhe only taught him the formula once, and he quickly memorized it. By the time he reached the top of the mountain, he had already memorized the chant. He picked up the hammer and chanted the incantation. Then, he smashed the hammer down. The sound of the bell was loud and clear as it spread out in waves. As the first bell rang, there seemed to be some characters on the bell that faintly lit up and then extinguished. The words flashed too fast that Bai Zhe and Shen Yanma could not see what was written on it. The rune flickered in the air as it spun. A moment later, it actually condensed into a shadow. Shen Yanma was stunned when he saw the shadow. Bai Zhe opened his mouth wide and knelt down. Supreme Divinity. The shadow was wearing a wide robe with long sleeves and black hair hanging down. He stood there quietly and looked at the person who had rung the bell. That appearance was clearly Shinjiuli. Shen Yanma screamed and rushed over. Father! Clang! He did not rush into his father's arms. Instead, he went straight through his father's body and hit the bell. He almost had a bump on his forehead. He quickly turned around and looked at the figure in a daze. His father was still standing there as if he was looking at him, but there was no expression on his face. It was indeed his father's appearance, but his temperament was too high and too cold. When he looked at him, it was as if he was looking down on all living things. Chapter 1852. Father. Shen Yanma pouted. His eyes were already filled with tears. He opened his arms to the figure. Father, give me a hug. Bai Zhe quickly pulled him back. Little master, this is the phantom of the Divine Lord, not the real person. He must have some instructions. The phantom finally spoke. It was Shinjuli's usual cold and indifferent voice. Is there really an emergency? This is the bell of heaven. It cannot be wrung at will. Father, mother is seriously injured. Her body is frozen. I can't wake her up. Shin Nyenma was still a child. He cried out loud. Father, please save mother. Shinjuli's phantom slightly lowered his eyes. There is indeed an emergency. You can ring the bell 3 times. Father, can you please save mother? Shin Nyenma missed him so much. At this moment, when he saw him standing not far away from him, he could not care about anything else. He opened his little arms and reluctantly threw himself at him. His body was in the air again. This time, he clearly saw his little body passing through the other person's body. It was not the other person who avoided him. Father. Shin Nyenma's voice was hoarse. His big eyes were full of tears. Shinjuli's phantom disappeared. Bai Zai explained to Shin Nyenma, Little Master, this is just a phantom set by the Divine Lord a long time ago. This bell is not a trivial matter, and it cannot be rung easily. The Divine Lord is afraid that someone accidentally rung the bell out of curiosity, so, he is not the real person. Little Master, you should try to save your mother first. Shin Nyenma was speechless. He rubbed his eyes and desperately tried to ring the bell again and again. When the bell rang for the 10th time, the big bell suddenly emitted a bright golden light. In the golden light, a person slowly emerged from the bell. The fire in the alchemy furnace was burning. A faint smell of medicine filled the entire hall. Ning Xuema did not expect that Shinjuli would bring Xuema to the alchemy room. Little Xuema was seriously injured because of qi deviation. Her meridians were broken in many places, and the aphrodisiac was still wreaking havoc in her body, colliding with her blood vessels. Once he let go, those meridians would be broken again, and her little life might be lost. Shinjuli, I love you so much. Shinjuli, let go of me. Shinjuli, I feel terrible. Boo-hoo. Fearing that her injuries would worsen, Shinjuli no longer dared to seal her acupoints, so he only used his arms to encircle her in his embrace. Her little face was flushed red as she scratched his body. Not only did Shinjuli have to carry her, but he also had to pay attention to the fire in the medicine refining furnace and the concoction of the herbs. Inevitably, it was a bit tiring, and his forehead was dripping with sweat. I'll refine the antidote for you. Be good and bear with it. It'll be over soon. He comforted her. Little Xuema was still a little clear-headed. The bloodstains on her face and body had been cleaned by him, but her eyes were still blood-red, as clear as gems. She tightly pursed her little mouth and endured bitterly. What the two of them did not expect was that the aphrodisiac was so overbearing. Shinjuli consecutively concocted 3 or 4 different antidotes for her to consume, but there was almost no effect. The blood in little Xuema's body was boiling more and more fiercely. An inexplicable desire made even her bones itch. Her consciousness finally fell into a semi-confused state, and everything was left with her instincts. She subconsciously rubbed her legs and wrapped her body around Shinjuli, as if he was the only source of her thirst. She rubbed against him like a snake. I feel terrible. I feel terrible. Chapter 1853. Although she was old enough to be a young girl, her body was still that of a 12 or 13-year-old. She was still very young. She usually did not pay attention to the matters between men and women, so she was still very ignorant about her own discomfort. Although she was very uncomfortable, she did not know how to solve it. She trembled and wrapped herself around his body, as if she could draw a little bit of coldness from him. Help me. No matter how calm Shinjuli was, under her entanglement, he finally became a little unsteady. Be good, I'm helping you now. The next batch of medicine might. No. I don't want to take the medicine. Woo-woo, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Little Xiaoma's hands and feet moved chaotically. The outer robe that was draped over her body was once again torn apart by her actions. Lying naked in his embrace, she felt so uncomfortable that tears streamed down her face. Just let me die. Woo woo. You won't help me. The medicine surged up again, and she vomited another mouthful of blood. Ning Xiaoma looked at them from the side and knew that it was not good. It seemed that this aphrodisiac could only be removed by real means. And looking at little Xiaoma's condition, it really could not be delayed any longer. Luo Jiuchen, that pervert. He actually used such a perverted method on little Xiaoma for no reason. When they were in the sea, if Shinjiuli had not saved her in time, she was afraid that she would have fallen into Luo Jiuchen's hands, and her virginity would have been taken away by Luo Jiuchen. Was that person crazy? How thirsty must he be to scheme against a child? Ning Xiaoma's gaze fell on Shinjiuli again. What method would he use to detoxify little Xiaoma? Could it be? Just as she thought of this, Shinjiuli suddenly stood up with little Xiaoma in his arms and said in a hoarse voice, "Okay, I'll help you." With a wave of his sleeve, a bed appeared out of thin air in the medicine refining hall. He quickly put her on the bed. Ning Xiaoma opened her mouth slightly. He really wanted to do it himself. But little Xiaoma's body was not mature yet. Could this bear him? Although Ning Xiaoma had only slept with Shinjiuli once, she knew his body very well. His size was definitely not something that little Xiaoma's small body could bear. No matter what Shinjiuli did, he always paid attention to the mood. Even the big bed that he had randomly created here was very beautiful. After he carried her in his arms, the light blue bed curtained with the blue sky and white clouds. In this kind of situation, Ning Xiaoma also knew that it was inappropriate to look on. Although she was extremely curious, she didn't want to be a spectator. However, in this strange dream, her actions were not based on her own will. She originally wanted to take a look at the medicine, but she did not expect that in the blink of an eye, she had already entered the bed curtain. Then, she felt the world spinning, and her vision darkened and brightened again. Then, she felt as if her whole body was burning up, and the heat in her body surged. Ning Xiaoma widened her eyes in shock, and her brain exploded. She actually entered little Xiaoma's body at this time. And not just a bystander at the side, she was lying in his arms with her clothes disheveled. She felt his heartbeat, smelled the unique fragrance on his body, and hugged his strong and sturdy body. She hugged him. She could touch him. Chapter 1854. The great joy even diluted the unbearable heat in her body. She stared at him with her eyes wide open. For a moment, she couldn't believe it. Her body seemed to be fixed and she couldn't move. Probably because her expression was too strange, Shinjiuli raised his eyebrows slightly. His palm directly covered her wrist to check her pulse. "What's wrong? How do you feel?" She could feel the heat of his palm. His faint and light breath was on the top of her head. Everything couldn't be more real. She actually had his embrace again. Before she lost his embrace, she didn't feel anything. But after she lost it completely, she realized how much she longed for him. She longed for him so much that her heart ached. She didn't answer his question. She just stretched out her arms and hugged him tightly. Tears rolled down from her eyes drop by drop. Shinjiuli's body stiffened when she hugged him. Her hug was like a reunion after a long separation. He paused for a moment. "Why are you?" He didn't finish his sentence because Ning Xiaoma had already raised her head and kissed him. Her hot lips covered his directly. "Jiuli, I feel terrible." Her voice was very hoarse, but there was a strange tremor in it. Shinjiuli held his breath. He held her arms with both hands and wanted to push her away. But when he saw the string of tears rolling down her cheeks, He seemed to be unable to bear it. While he was in a daze, she had already pounced on him like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. Her whole body lay on his chest. Her arms were around his neck. Her lips and tongue were wreaking havoc on his lips. Their tongues intertwined fiercely. She was originally wearing a casual robe. At this moment, under the violent movements, the robe was opened and hung loosely on her body. Her hot and smooth little body was completely in his arms. Through the thin clothes on his body, he could feel the scorching heat of her body. Shinjoli had been a god for so long. Although he understood the relationship between men and women very well, he had never practiced it and had no experience. When he carried little Shuama to the bed just now, he didn't really want to have sex with her. Instead, he wanted to use a special spell to treat her. Because that kind of treatment required him to take off all her clothes and lay her down, he simply conjured up a bed to make things easier. He was only doing this to bully her because she didn't understand this kind of thing. He guessed that no matter how upset she was, she wouldn't know what to do. But he didn't expect that she would pounce on him as if she was suddenly enlightened. Not only did she kiss him passionately, her little hand also reached into his lapel and her fingertips were caressing his sensitive spot. Shinjoli's body instantly froze. He raised his hand and grabbed her wrist, pulling her small hand out. "Who taught you these?" There was a trace of anger in his voice. In his impression, Shuama was still a child. A genuine child. Now, this child actually knew how to seduce men, and this technique, it didn't seem like the first time. Ning Shuama raised her head and looked straight into his deep and serene eyes. Those eyes were extremely deep and dark, like a deep pool. No one could see the emotions in those eyes. At this moment, he was looking at her like this. There seemed to be a surge of dark fire in the bottom of his eyes. However, this dark fire was too fast to be caught. Ning Shuama pursed her lips and closed her eyes slightly. In this aspect, she was very miserable. She had been entangled with the Almighty for 3 lifetimes, but they had only been intimate for 2 lifetimes. Chapter 1855. In Shui Yimo's life, it might have been too long ago, so she didn't have a deep impression of him. But in Ning Shuama's life, she only had sex with him once, and it was when he forced himself on her. Of course, that was when she had already fallen in love with him, but she still had some misgivings in her heart, so it could be considered a half-hearted refusal. The current great god shouldn't have that kind of feelings for little Shuama. The reason why he was entangled with her in this bed was probably purely to detoxify her poison. Although she didn't know what method he wanted to use, looking at his current expression, she knew that it wasn't a real physical intimacy, but something else. Could it be, he wanted to use his hands? At this moment, Ning Shuama's thoughts drifted 80,000 miles away. At this moment, she was still lying on top of Shinjoli's body. Her clothes were draped over her back, and her shoulders, calves, and even a part of her thighs were exposed. Her snow-white little feet were hooking onto his legs. The distance between the two couldn't be any closer, and there wasn't even a sliver of space between them. Shinjoli's clothes were disheveled as he allowed her to press down on him. His hand clasped her wrist, and the two of them looked at each other. "Speak." His voice was extremely deep, as if a storm had condensed. Ning Shuama blinked her eyes. Perhaps it was because her soul had entered the body later than Ning Shuama's, in addition to her understanding of medicinal properties, so when she took over this body, the magic in her body automatically activated and forcibly suppressed the poison in her body. However, she was, after all, experienced human affairs, so she was extremely sensitive to this kind of desire in her body. What's more, the person pressing down on her body was her crazy husband? At this moment, she simply had the thought of stripping him naked and forcing herself on him. She gasped for breath, and beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She also couldn't answer Shinjuli's question. Could she say that she was his wife from 50,000 years in the future? Could she say that in this strange dream, she had possessed her previous body? No, she couldn't say it. Even if she said it, he wouldn't believe her. Maybe he would even think that she was someone else's soul, and use some kind of magic to forcibly expel her. Although this was a dream from 50,000 years ago, she was already very satisfied to be able to have such close contact with him in the dream. Therefore, she didn't answer his question. She just blinked her big watery eyes and spat out a few words, "I feel terrible. Jolie, I feel terrible." As she spoke, she used her toenails to gently rub the side of his leg. Thanks to Shui Mo's memories, she knew that Shinjuli's place was also a sensitive area. Her little hand was being held by him, so she couldn't reach into his clothes. She used her fingertips to draw circles on his chest. Ahem, this was not her experience. She had learned it from watching movies and TV dramas in the modern world. Art came from life, and some things in movies and TV series were also very practical. Ning Xuemo's two moves seemed to be unintentional, but they made Shinjuli's body suddenly stiffen, and his breathing became slightly chaotic. He looked at the little girl in his arms whose face was flushed red, but her eyes were watery. Her eyes seemed to be able to speak, and there was a desire, as well as an indescribable pain and love. She was no longer the girl who kept saying that she wanted to marry him, but was ignorant about love. He really doted on little Xuemo. After all, she was a child that he had raised with his own hands. However, perhaps because she never grew up and looked like a child, he never had that kind of desire for her. Chapter 1856. But maybe because she never grew up and looked like a child, he never had that kind of desire for her. He only treated her as a child, even when she became the Devil Lord. Now that he saw her like this, he had a strange feeling in his heart for the first time. He had a feeling that he wanted to press her under his body. His eyes suddenly darkened as he stared at her. The expression in his eyes was unreadable, Xuemo. His voice was low with a hint of dullness. The last syllable was slightly raised, as if there was a small hook that made her heart tremble. Do you know what you're doing now? How could she not know? She just wanted to seduce him. She just wanted to be close to him. Even if it was with this small body. She longed for him so much that she was going crazy. She loved him so much that she wanted to merge with him, not to mention that her body was still burning from the attack of the desire poison. She lowered her head and kissed the tip of his nose. Her hot breath was on the side of his lips. Jolie, I want to sleep with you. Little Xuemo often said these two words. Every time Shinjuli heard it, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Naturally, he didn't lower himself to her level. Now that he heard it, his heartstrings trembled slightly. Her eyes were watery, and her small face was as red as an apple. Because of her desire, her skin was pink, and there was a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. Her small mouth, which was originally like a cherry blossom petal, was now like a dewy rose, as if it was tempting people to pick it. His dark blue eyes seemed to have stars floating in them. Sleep with you. Did she really know what sleep with him was? He reached out his hand and wiped her sweaty forehead with his fingertips. Then, he tucked her hair behind her ear. Good girl, tell me, what sleep with you is. If it was little Xuemo, he reckoned that she would have buried herself in his embrace and told him that sharing a room was just sleeping on the same bed. This was also why little Xuemo couldn't understand why Shinjuli didn't agree to her marriage. If he slept with her, she would grow up. It was such a simple thing, yet he still refused. It was obvious that he didn't like her. However, Ning Xuemo was the one who possessed her body. She blinked her eyes and didn't know how to answer. Although Shinjuli had been lying on the bed, allowing her to lie on top of him as if she was a fish on a chopping board. His eyes were fixed on her face, and there was a touch of contemplation in his eyes. A hand gently caressed the back of her head. Ning Xuemo was, after all, very sensitive. She could clearly feel his divine sense probing into her body. He was probably suspicious of her. He probably wanted to see if her body had been taken over by other wandering spirits. Suddenly, his fingers paused. Ning Xuemo's heart trembled, but her eyes widened as she stared at him. Although she came later, this body was originally her body, so her soul didn't feel out of place in it at all. He shouldn't be able to find anything, right? She didn't want him to probe any further. She tilted her head and kissed him on the lips. Her voice trembled. It's the pleasure of us sleeping together." Shinjioli stiffened slightly. He tilted his head, and Ning Xuemo's lips touched his ear. She cursed bitterly in her heart. When a man wanted to rape a woman, he just needed to use his strength to suppress her. However, when a woman wanted to rape a man, especially a man with terrifying self-control, it was like a dog biting a hedgehog. There was no place to bite. Chapter 1857. She had been lying on top of him for so long, but she did not feel that he was aroused. She knew what he looked like when he was aroused. Even if he did not have sex with her, the changes in his body could not lie. She made up her mind and curled up one of her legs deliberately to touch that place under his white robe. However, before her leg could do anything, it was pinned down by his leg. His eyes became deep. "I think. I did not teach you this." "Who taught you this?" Ning Xuemo blurted out. "You, me." Shinjioli raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat, and she finally changed her words. "You. Of course, you did not teach me, but I have been in the devil world for so many years, and I have heard some things. How can I not know?" "So it was because of what you heard in the devil world." There was no emotion in his voice, but there was a hint of coldness. "Yes." Ning Xuemo nodded. Anyway, the relationship between men and women in the devil world had always been messy, so he could not suspect anything. Shinjioli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. He seemed to be joking. "Okay, I will lie here. How are you going to sleep with me?" Was he flirting with her? Also, from his tone, did he have a hobby of being raped? Speaking of which, why didn't he blush or pant when he said these things to a child? His tone was still a bit like teasing a child. Damn it. Women were naturally shy when it came to this kind of thing. Ning Xuemo was no exception, even if she had experienced 2 lives, and even if she had been a secret agent. However, she was bolder now. Although she was blushing, since she had seized this opportunity, she wanted to continue doing it. She had not slept with him many times, and she had already died several times. It was too unfair. With this thought, Ning Xuemo decisively took the initiative. Anyway, she had it to cover her face. She was not afraid. She blinked and said in a tender voice, "Are you really going to let me do whatever I want? You've learned a lot of nonsense." There was no emotion in Shinjioli's voice. He raised his hand and pinched her cheek. At this time, he actually said, "You look so ugly." Ning Xuemo, big brother, saying such words at a time like this is like pouring cold water on people, okay? Of course, she knew what she looked like now. Her face was still disfigured. She gritted her teeth and simply leaned against his ear and chuckled. "It's the same even if the lights are off. You can imagine when my skin was white and clean." Shinjioli. This conversation was too adult. The light in his eyes faintly flickered, and his palm stroked the middle of her back. "My eyesight is good. Whether the lights are off or not, it's all the same. His fingertips gently stroked her scratched back. It was obviously a very simple action, but it made Ning Xuema, who was extremely sensitive due to the drug, tremble. Her waist went soft, and she almost collapsed in his arms. She took a deep breath and tried to support herself. She wanted to raise her hands, but found that her hands were still restrained by him. She curled her lips and smiled. Don't tell me you're going to let me do whatever I want. What's the point of holding my hands? She looked very charming when she curled her lips and smiled. Her eyes were also very lively. There was a kind of charm that Shinjioli had never seen before, and it hit his heartstrings heavily. His eyes deepened slightly, and he let go of her hands. Okay, you can continue. His eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. Sure enough, he continued to lie there and let her do whatever she wanted. Chapter 1858. He kept looking at her. No one could see any emotion in his eyes, but Ning Xuema still panicked from his stare. She had the urge to turn around and run away. However, her extreme thirst for him made her want to continue. She steeled her heart and tore open his lapel, exposing a large patch of his moonlight white skin to her eyes. So beautiful. The Almighty's figure was really perfect. He was so perfect that she couldn't find any flaws. Her little hand caressed his collarbone as if she was touching a fine sculpture. You're really good looking. She praised him. Shinjioli did not say anything. She was not the only one who complimented his good looks. However, when she said it in her soft voice, his heart skipped a beat. He continued to stare at her, waiting to see how far she could go. He was originally trying to coax her with a joking attitude. After all, she had been holding it in for too long. It wasn't good for her to be depressed in her heart. He wanted to let her play for a while so that her depression could be released. It would also be convenient for him to use a special method to expel the poison from her body. But now, there was a strange feeling rising from within his body, making his aura slightly unstable. Ning Xuema also made up her mind. Wasn't it just taking the initiative? Although she hadn't taken the initiative before, she had seen a pig run before. She lowered her body and kissed his neck, his Adam's apple, his collarbone, his chin, his lips, and finally his ear. She curled her little tongue and sucked his earlobe into her mouth, gently biting it twice. The man's body stiffened again. Ning Xuema was surprised to find that his body seemed to have a reaction. She felt a certain part of his body touching her, thus, she blushed and rubbed herself against him. Shinjioli suddenly turned over. Ning Xuema felt the world was spinning. When she opened her eyes again, she was already under him. He was pressing her so tightly that she couldn't move at all. She didn't feel anything when she was on top of him, but now that she was being pressed down by him, she could feel a strong sense of urgency from him. It made her heart beat wildly. He stretched out a finger and placed it on her little mouth. There was a dark light in his eyes. Xuema, you're playing with fire. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and looked up at him. His face was still calm, but his chaotic heartbeat betrayed him. A certain part of his body betrayed him. She didn't answer him. Instead, she raised her hand and hooked his neck. She kissed his Adam's apple and breathed into his ear. Jioli, give it to me, okay? If you don't save me, I'll die. Xuema, I only treat you as a child. Shinjioli sighed and held her hand that was burning the fire. Bear with it. I will find another way to save you. He did not want to play with her anymore. I'm not young anymore. I'm thousands of years old. She raised her head and nibbled on his collarbone. His body stiffened again. But I raised you with my own hands. You're like my own daughter. He couldn't change his mind. Ning Xuema's face darkened. She knew it. She was raised by a man when she was naked. It was really sad. But I'm not your biological daughter. I'm not related to you by blood. Jiuli, I only see you as my husband. Ning Xuema kissed his chin again. The last two words obviously made Jiuli pause. Husband. Do you know what a husband does? Protect me, pity me, go through hardships with me, have children with me, and never leave my side. Chapter 1859. Ning Xuema felt tears welling up in her eyes as she spoke. She and Jiuli had been entangled with each other for 3 lifetimes. Now that they were finally together, he was still asking questions. She raised her hands to hug his waist and pressed her face against his chest. I miss you. I really miss you. His chest was damp from her burning tears. Her voice contained an indescribable sadness, causing his heart to suffocate as if it was drowning. He lowered his eyes to look at the little person in his embrace. He calmed down and tried to suppress something. Xuema, the reason why you can't grow up it's not because of this. I'm thinking of a way to make you grow up. Give me some time. I won't leave you alone. It turned out that Jiuli was not indifferent to her growth. He was also looking for a way to make her grow up. You won't be able to find it in this lifetime. Ning Xuema blurted out. If he could find it in this lifetime, she wouldn't look like a child when she was reborn. What did you say? Jiuli wanted to see her face clearly, but she clung onto him like an octopus. Her head was pressed tightly against his chest. It was impossible for him to pull her off him even if he wanted to. Nothing. Ning Xuema also knew that she had let it slip. She listened to his heartbeat greedily. She didn't know how long she could stay in this little body, so she wanted to hug him for as long as she could. She didn't want to talk to him anymore. If they talked in this position, all the ambiguity would be gone. Moreover, she could feel that the inexplicable heat flow in her body was getting faster and faster. A huge desire was surging in her body like a tidal wave, making her feel the pain in her veins again. Her head was buzzing, and her mind was filled with the images of her rolling with him. Her breathing became more and more rapid, and her whole body was so hot that it was almost burning. His lapel had been messed up by her, and a large part of it was open. It was very tempting. I don't feel good, Jiuli. I really like you. Her voice was filled with urgency. She felt like she was going to explode from the desire poison. The poison was too overbearing, and she was losing control. Jiuli took a light breath and raised his hand to hold her in place. You want me, not just to cure the poison that prevents you from growing up. Isn't it because I'm the strongest person in the world? No. Ning Xuema shook her head and said word by word, I like you. Jiuli, I like you. She couldn't help but raise her head to look for his lips. There was a bit of resentment in her voice as she said, Didn't you say that you would let me do whatever I want? You didn't keep your word. Before she could finish her sentence, she felt a sudden warmth on her lips. Her lips were sealed tightly by his. Xuema, it's not good for you to do this kind of thing. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his pair of cold eyes were as deep as a well. It was as if he wanted to swallow her whole. However, there was a kind of determination in his voice. His lips were on her lips. Xuema, once we start, we can't stop anymore. Don't you regret it? Ning Xuema's heart was beating like a drum. She knew what Jiuli meant. He wanted her, but could her body withstand him? She swallowed a mouthful of saliva. She didn't care anymore. If it hurts, so be it. She put her hands around his neck and let him get closer to her. She answered him with 3 words, I don't regret it. After thinking for a while, she added, You have to be gentler. I'm too tender. Chapter 1860. She put her hands around his neck and let him lean closer to her. She answered him with 3 words, no. After thinking for a while, she added, You have to be gentler. I'm a little tender. When she said the last 4 words, she regretted it. She was afraid that he would use this reason to back off, just a little tender. Actually, it's enough. After saying this, she felt like her face was burning. Right now, she was like an anxious woman who was begging him to come to her. Shinjuli did not say anything, but there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. He pressed his fingers on her back and rubbed it hard. There was a faint white light flashing. Ning Xiuma's body suddenly heated up. There was a loud bang in her head. She felt dizzy and thought that her soul was flying away again. When the strong dizziness passed, she quickly opened her eyes and found that she was still in Shinjuli's arms. He was still half pressing on her. His eyes were fixed on her body. His fingertips brushed the corner of her lips. Xiuma, there was a hint of lingering in his voice. He leaned over and held her in his arms. Their bodies were tightly pressed together. Ning Xiuma even felt that her breasts were pressed against his chest. When he moved slightly, he felt as if he had been electrocuted. Breasts? Ning Xiuma subconsciously lowered her head. She exclaimed softly and opened her eyes wide. Full breasts, slender waist, slender legs, and exquisite curves. How was this the body of a 12 or 13-year-old child? It was clearly the body of a 16-year-old girl. She suddenly looked up. You have a way to make me grow up. There was surprise and anger in her words. She had been depressed for thousands of years with this lowly face. She had been worried about whether she could grow up or not. She was almost desperate to grow up. She did not expect that he could make her mature with just a spell. This person was too hateful. Why didn't he use it earlier? He knew how much she wanted to grow up. Shinjuli only replied with 4 words, 2 hours. Ning Xiuma widened her eyes and quickly understood. Are you saying that I can last for 4 hours in this adult form? Shinjuli looked down at her and said, It seems that you have become a lot smarter. Ning Xiuma opened her mouth and wanted to ask him more, but Shinjuli hugged her tightly. He raised his hand and spread her hair. Her hair spread out on the pillow and spread out under her body. Xiuma, are you sure you want to continue talking to me? His fingers caressed her delicate neck, where the veins were throbbing. It was obvious that although her body had turned into an adult, the poison in her body had not disappeared. It was still wreaking havoc in her body, but she was barely able to suppress it. His gaze was focused, and his voice was a little hoarse. His slight panting made her heart beat wildly, and her small face could not help but turn red. Her small hand was still pushing his shoulder. She subconsciously wanted to take it back, but he held it and kissed her fingers. The tickling feeling went straight to her heart. Are you shy? Shinjuli said in a low voice. His voice was right next to her ear, with a hint of teasing. I thought you didn't know how to be shy. Fortunately, Ning Xiuma only felt that her face was burning. Until this moment, she finally understood that she could never compare with the Almighty in terms of shamelessness. Once he decided to do something, he would do it calmly, and no one could change his mind. Chapter 1861. Just like now, she was the one who took the initiative at the beginning, but now she was completely passive. She could feel his hands moving around her body. His fingertips were hot, but his movements were calm. With a flick of his fingertips, he took off her belt and slid inside her clothes. Her body trembled and she gave a soft snort, but then she held her breath. Wasn't he being that? He hadn't even started yet and she had already made a sound. Would she leave a bad impression on him in this world? She hadn't even finished thinking about this when her lips were forcefully pried open by him. His pleasant voice sounded in a low voice, "Don't suppress it, just follow your heart." His kiss was forceful and domineering. He attacked her lips without leaving any leeway. She was hugging his real body and not an empty dream. Just thinking about this was enough to make her blood boil. Her hands trembled as she hugged his waist and raised her head to receive his kiss. The familiar scent that belonged to him filled her nose, making her heart feel like a balloon that was filled with air. It was as if it was about to fly. His fingertips were warm as they brushed against her skin, making her unable to stop herself from trembling. She already loved him so much, and with the effects of the drug, her body was very sensitive. Just a gentle touch and a gentle kiss from him was enough to make her heart beat like crazy. Their breaths were all hot and their breaths intertwined, causing the temperature in the tent to rise rapidly. His lips and tongue were everywhere, igniting clusters of flames wherever they went, causing her body to tremble uncontrollably. "Great God!" she muttered. Her hands went into his smooth hair. She wanted to push him away, but she also wanted to press him into her body. When she said that she wanted to do something to him, she said it in a righteous manner, but at this moment, all the strength in her body disappeared. Her little hand was in a pushing position, but she didn't have the strength to push him away. The blood in her body seemed to be boiling, making her face turn red like a tomato. Her heart was filled with extreme joy and extreme warmth. In her impression, her first time with him wasn't in a situation where both of them were willing, so it wasn't a good one. At that time, he was punishing her, and she felt wronged because of his dominance. Unlike now, even though she was drugged, she really liked how he treated her, and he seemed to be very willing to do so. He kissed her deeply again and again, and she responded to him again and again. Their clothes were tossed out of the tent one after another. When their skin touched, she couldn't help but hug him tightly as she felt his sweaty and hot body. "Shuama, it will hurt a little," he whispered in her ear. "N," she replied carelessly. Her head was so hot that it was burning into a paste. Actually, she didn't even hear what he said clearly. Finally, he slowly entered. Ning Shuama's body stiffened slightly. It still hurt a little. However, this pain was nothing compared to the pain she had suffered in the past. It was completely within her tolerance range. Moreover, this pain was caused by the man she loved the most, so she didn't care about this pain at all. This was the kind of romance that should only happen on their wedding night. This should be the first time they did it together. Warmth mixed with an indescribable pain wreaked havoc in her chest, and she couldn't help but tear up. Chapter 1862. Does it hurt? He leaned over her body. His breath was very unstable, but his movements were very restrained. He lowered his head and kissed the sweat on her forehead and the tears at the corner of her eyes. He thought she was crying because of the pain. His hot breath blew on the side of her neck. She raised her arms and hugged him. Then, she took the initiative to kiss him. The fire in the medicine cauldron gradually extinguished, but the temperature in the bed curtain rose with the rise and fall of the figure inside. Soft moans came from there intermittently. From time to time, one or two sentences with low breaths floated by along with the rise and fall of the bed curtain. "Don't force yourself. It's not good for the antidote at this time. Come, call me out. You made love with me. Just to detoxify, that's the main reason." Shinjoli's voice was calm. He admitted it generously. "Be good, don't let my sacrifice down. Call me out, sacrifice." She was the one who sacrificed herself, right? She was originally just a bystander. Suddenly, she was dragged in to have sex with him. If it wasn't for the fact that she loved him so much, she would have kicked him down just for saying those words. She suddenly laughed softly. "What are you laughing at?" His voice sounded surprised. "You did make a sacrifice." Her voice was slow and purposely dragged out. "Then, do you want me to compensate you? I have a luminous pearl as big as the moon in my demon palace. Just take it as a reward for your hard work this time." He seemed to have done something abruptly that made her cry out, but she couldn't say the rest of her words. "Hey, you. Be gentler. Since I've given you a reward for your hard work, I have to be worthy of your luminous pearl." His voice was quite calm. So, 50,000 years ago, Shinjoli was already so black-bellied. However, she had known Shinjoli for so long after all. She knew his temper deeply. He didn't care about anything and could let go of anything. He was cold and indifferent when dealing with people. His identity also made him used to being high and mighty, giving people a feeling that he couldn't be blasphemed. However, he did things as he pleased. If he liked someone, he liked them. If he loved someone, he loved them. Once he was sure of his feelings, he would not back down. He would even forcefully plunder them. In front of the person he loved, there was nothing he couldn't do. Ning Xuema didn't know what the original development was, but at this moment, she understood that Shinjoli had already fallen in love with little Xuema, but he didn't know it. He always thought that his feelings for her were like his own child. At that time, little Xuema didn't understand the pleasure between a man and a woman. If Ning Xuema didn't possess Xuema's body, little Xuema wouldn't know what to do no matter how uncomfortable she felt. In all likelihood, the relationship between her and Shinjoli would not be broken. Shinjoli still did not know her feelings for him and still treated her like a child. As for the poison this time, other than the most direct method, what else could he do? There was a hint of doubt in her mind. "Can you still be distracted at this time?" His low voice seemed to be mixed with a faint threat, which made her heart tremble slightly. She was about to open her mouth to argue, but her slightly opened mouth suddenly screamed. Time intertwined, and the moonlight slowly moved on the gauze curtain. The night was still long, but their beautiful life had just begun. Shen Yanma looked at the person who slowly appeared from the golden light in surprise. It was a very handsome young man. His purple robe shone under the sunlight, and his whole person was as refined as an orchid tree. What was more strange was that this person had a head of silver hair. The silver hair was like the satin of the moonlight that hung behind his back. Chapter 1863. The moment he appeared, his eyes were slightly closed as if he was asleep. He slowly opened his eyes when the golden light disappeared. His eyes were extremely dark as if they were condensed into the night sky. Finally. "You are out." He sighed softly. His voice was as ethereal as a breeze. Shen Yanma looked at him in a daze. He could not figure out who he was. After a moment of silence, he asked, Who are you?" The man first glanced at Bai Zhe, then finally fixed his eyes on Shen Yanma's face. After a moment of careful observation, he suddenly smiled. "I am the one who can solve your problems. If you have any requests, just let me know." Shen Yanma's eyes lit up. He had a lot of requests now. "Can you help me with any request I have?" Shen Yanma asked in a crisp voice. The man smiled like a spring breeze slowly brushing across the lake. "Of course, I am a god. I can satisfy all your requests." Oh. That was great. There were other gods that he could ask for help from. Shen Yanma's eyes were even brighter. "You are a god, too. Then, when he was about to speak, the man continued, however, I can only promise to solve one problem for you. You have to think carefully before you speak. Shin Nyenma was speechless. There were two problems that needed to be solved urgently. One was to bring his father back, and the other was to wake his mother up. He stood there and hesitated. The man looked at him with a smile and gently tapped the fan in his hand. He always had a bad taste. He liked to see people struggling to make a decision so that he could feel a sense of accomplishment. Obviously, the little guy in front of him had something urgent to ask of him, but it must be more than one thing. It was difficult for a child to make a decision, so he opened the fan and smiled. Don't worry. You can think about it slowly. He waved the fan and wanted to walk around and enjoy the scenery first. Unexpectedly, Shin Nyenma immediately said, Okay, I beg you. You have to bring my father back. As long as his father came back, it should be easy for him to wake up his mother. There was no need for this man to do anything, and the family of 3 could be reunited. It was a great choice. Even Bai Zhe could not help but give the young master a thumbs up. The young master was indeed very decisive. The man stopped moving his fan and looked at Shin Nyenma. Who is your father? Shin Jiuli, the divine lord of this world. Shin Nyenma held his head high. The man's lips twitched slightly. He looked at Shin Nyenma and pondered for a moment. What other requests do you have? Shin Nyenma blinked his big eyes. As long as you can save my father, I don't need you to do anything else. That person, can you agree to this condition? Shin Nyenma asked. The fan in the man's hand stiffened, and he sighed slightly. This request, perhaps, you have to change your request. He did not expect that he would not be able to fulfill this child's first request. Shin Nyenma's eyes dimmed for a moment. He pouted and said, So, your promise just now was just a bluff. That person coughed lightly. In this world, there was only one thing he couldn't do. I can fulfill your other requests. You know, when a god disappears, it truly disappears. Not even a soul remains. So. Shin Nyenma's facial expression changed drastically. He glared at the man. Nonsense. My father didn't disappear. Mother said that my father was seriously injured and is in isolation. He will come out after a while. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.